I'd like to call to order the study session, work session of the City Council for the evening of September 13th. We're here to discuss the 2022-23 budget and discuss working through a proposal that will be forthcoming to the public on the evening of the 20th in a public hearing. So at this juncture, Sherelle, do you want to go ahead and present?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Good evening. Is it evening? We in evening or we afternoon?
Almost.
Okay, hello, hey y'all. My name is Sherelle Evans-Jones. I'm the Director of Finance with the City of Palmer Springs, for those of you who don't know me. I am here with very little information tonight. We have presented a number of different presentations over the course of this budget season. Is it a season? It feels like a season. We've presented a number of different presentations, facts, stats, figures, etc. And so the nature of this discussion, what we hope from a management perspective, will be kind of letting you know where we land in terms of some of the fund balances, etc. And then unpacking a couple of different options. And then my intention is to back out of the way and allow council to discuss and come to consensus on the direction that we seek to take overall with respect to the budget. In terms of timing, we are kind of at that point that Boyz II Men sang about. We're kind of at the end of the road, so to speak, even though, as Councilmember Merritt mentioned, the adoption of the budget takes place next week, a week from today. But I mentioned the Boyz II Men end of the road moment because we are, in order to make those changes, there are a number of different changes that have to flow through, and this fund is connected to this fund, and to make sure that those are all properly stated in the document that gets posted on Friday in accordance with our open records details. We do kind of need to hear from you and to gain as best as we can consensus around the direction that you would like to see the proposed budget to be amended. Okay, so with that information, I'm going to show you this, and a copy of that is at your seat. Because it might be a little bit difficult to read from the screen. So I'm going to talk you through what this is. It is not the real appendix page, but what I sensed from the conversations that we had most recently in our last budget conversation, what I sensed is that we had a number of different directions that we were interested in taking. We talked about the idea of possibly moving some things up from the 2022-23 year up to the current year, and doing some things to make room for possibilities. So this is not the real appendix page. What we did is we tried to factor in a number of those things, because basically there's 1,700 different accounts that all of those changes would have to flow through. So instead of putting those through those accounts and then determining and finding out that that's not what you wanted, we are trying to show you what the amended page would look like with all of those different things that you talked about affected. So that's why so many different lines there. I'm going to talk you through what those are. Well, light gray doesn't show up very well, is what I'm learning here. This and this are light gray and on my screen there. And what I'm trying to denote there, the first couple of lines, the assigned for future purchases within the 21-22 year, as well as assigned for and the credit for prior year reserve, those are all things that have been there the whole time. Okay? The items that are in yellow are items that relate to things that we presented as options in terms of ways that we could adjust the 22-23 information to utilize some of those balances to be able to do projects within our capital projects fund. So ways that we could utilize some of the the fund balance to do some of those CIP projects. That was a subject of one of the discussions from last week. So they were there last week as well as in terms of the presentation, but I'm showing them to you kind of all on the screen, you know, added up, etc. And then the last thing that is presented with circles around them have to do with two things. One is, these are the newest things that we added in listening to what the discussion was from last week. So one of the conversations was, well, can we, instead of doing some funding down here in 22-23, can we move that up in order to accomplish some things that we are interested in accomplishing in the 22-23 year. So what you see is one line that subtracts this number, you know, that moves this number from up there to up there as an expenditure. So that's all that's happening there is we heard what you said and we're trying to figure out areas and ways that we can make that movement. The other item, there was some conversation about the barn and presenting all of the details in terms of the potential sources or uses of fund balance. And so what you see there is for your consideration, and it represents the total project was estimated when we initially talked about it, estimated to be about $4 million, right, Mike? Okay. And a significant portion of that is covered by a federal grant. So the portion that we estimate to be remaining is in the $2.4 million mark. What we saw in the positive performance of the hotel motel fund and the potential adjustment that we're talking about with the fund balance and moving that fund balance to be more of a range of a target, so between $600,000 and $1 million, is that basically with that movement taken into consideration, you have room to pay for half of this off of hotel motel fund balance, still leaving you above that $1 million target, with the other half coming from general fund. So I'm trying to figure out ways to accomplish what it sounded like y'all were interested in, and be able to do that with utilizing some of the funds that are available and most closely associated with the barn project, so some of the hotel motel fund, and then minimizing the impact to general fund to enable you all to do some of the things that you seem most interested in doing. Yeah. Options. So you have status quo, which is the budget that's always been there, which maintains a tax rate, which provides for a 50% base rate credit for residential customers. So those kind of, I mean, it does more than those two things, we know that, right? But these are kind of the main 2 points of discussion related to that. So option one might be tax rate reduction of some sort. That is what you are discussing and hopefully will give me some direction on. A tax rate reduction of some cent amount and maintaining the water credit, okay? So some of the pros of this is that it, you know, provides more relief to business property owners, and that the tax rate reduction would go across the board in terms of whoever all is owning property within the area. That does mean that the percentage that will go to residents would be, you know, in the 25% range in terms of that total overall amount because of the method, because of the mix of property owners within our city. One of the cons is that, as I was kind of showing you the walk forward in our budget conversation last week and how SB2 has an impact on future years, you'll have that future year impact with a reduction of the tax rate. Okay, so that's option one. Option two is similar. A tax rate reduction, and I refer to it as X plus Y. Maybe that amount can be, maybe that cent off, that amount off could be a little bit more with the elimination of the water credit, okay? So that's an option. One of the pros is that it provides that relief also to, businesses, et cetera, and that that financial relief is actually spread throughout in terms of providing more benefit and providing a larger tax rate reduction. And again, the cons is the negative impact on future years. The third option is, I would say, is similar to these two. It's just the method in which we reduce the tax burden to the residents and to the businesses. So, I'm in the wrong spot because you can't see it because I'm in front of it. So, a dividend payment is the idea within the third option. So it would be whatever that tax rate reduction amount is, it would be paid in the form of a dividend to all property owners. And depending on that amount, so if you chose kind of a larger amount or a smaller amount, we may or may not need to eliminate the credit, depending on if you chose X or X plus Y, okay? And one of the pros of doing the dividend is that it eliminates this multiple year negative impact because it could be a payment. We have done this in past years, many years ago. The con is that it's extremely labor intensive to produce that amount of checks. That is something that in past years the finance team handled. It might have been lesser number of parcels or something like that. I am having some conversations with a vendor who has, a skill set in being able to perform this type of work to figure out if we choose the dividend option, they may be able to help us with executing that. It'll still take, some heavy lifting on the part of the finance team to get the role right and the details right, but it could be handled in the form of a dividend payment. That's what I got.
Thank you, Sherelle. All right, ladies and gentlemen, around the table. It's our time to discuss what we've heard, not only here, but what we heard in the prior two council meetings that had discussion points. So, anyone like to go first?
Okay, fine. I'll go first.
Sorry.
Cheryl, I've got a number of questions about the new summary. If you don't mind flipping back to that on the presentation. The transfers in the yellow area, I understand the city manager authorized adjustments. Those have been there. The other amounts, are those coming from the ARPA fund?
No, none of those are coming from ARPA fund.
Okay.
All of those are, you may remember the conversation from last week when basically we rolled in what the updated, I'm short, I can't reach it, the updated 21-22 information is. That caused, a larger amount to come down in terms of fund balance. The conversation was, how do we utilize any of that? If that is of interest to this council, how do we utilize any of that to be able to fund CIP infrastructure type projects that would help the city in terms of long-term improvement?
Okay. And so,
Councilman, on that too, those are things that were budget requests that did not make it into the budget that you saw. Because at that point, we had not forecasted sales tax to be as robust as it was.
Right.
So those were things that you would have normally seen in a budget that did not see the light of day, with the exception of the jail, because that was a cost overrun that we were anticipating. But the other ones were actual budget requests. So we put those back for your consideration because those were recommended by our directors.
okay. And so is in the revenue or any other fund balance, are we assuming the ARPA funds that we're expecting to receive, because we haven't received the first chunk of ARPA.
We have.
We have, okay.
We have received in last budget year, or this
Okay.
budget year, yeah. We received the first portion of it. We'll
Okay.
receive an additional portion. It doesn't flow through the general fund. So
Okay.
you're looking at this, it's not gonna flow through there.
Where is?
It
the
is a
ARPA?
special revenue. Basically, that's where we
Okay.
capture grant-type items and grant-type expenditures is
Okay.
within our special revenue fund.
So I recall seeing expenses for Parks Master Plan, street improvements for these exact amounts, and we were earmarking the first tranche of ARPA funds to pay for, I'm sorry, it wasn't ARPA funds.
It was
It
not.
was the additional revenue from this year's tax, property tax.
This year's
No.
general fund.
This year, so that's from general fund.
Not.
Okay,
Yes,
not
that's property
ARPA.
tax.
Okay, all right, sorry. Okay.
I'm listening.
Yeah,
Trying to get my
thinking.
numbers. Okay, got it.
So we look at the line for the addition to or use of fund balance, starts with general fund, 3.679,300.
Which line?
I'm sorry, the top one for this year. It starts out with 5.6 million. So before, that was a negative 635,100. So you're saying that most of that is sales and use tax that we weren't planning on?
Yes.
Okay.
In last week's presentation, I explained to the group that the estimate has changed. Basically, all of that time that you've been looking at the budget from, and it's been disclosed, that all of that time that you've been looking at the budget, that the section here for 21, 22 has been based on an estimate. We go through, after the 22, 23 budget process is at least underway, with information compiled from our departments, et cetera, and put in a budget book format, then we do this for a couple of reasons. The main reason is we do the 21, 22 a little bit later in the process because it allows for the passage of time to get us closer
Right.
to the end of the road so that we are guessing at less.
Right, right.
Okay? So basically, what you got in an updated presentation last week explained the change in those numbers. The significant change was revenues were higher.
Right,
Revenues from sales tax was the driving force of that.
right, right,
Okay.
right. And that's all right there in the 5.6. In the next column, the fixed assets, that one actually came up $100,000 exactly. For the fixed asset. Did we save some money there from the original summary? We went from 178, a negative 178.5 to a negative 78.5. So,
I can pull I'm a little bit, I can pull the old book and kind of compare old changes to new changes. I'm smiling because I was moving forward because that was the subject of the presentation last week.
Okay.
You know, we explained kind of the key changes. So what I'm willing to do is to kind of walk through kind of what the key changes are to make sure that you are comfortable.
okay,
Okay.
yeah, that's all I'm asking for here. So let me skip down then to our estimated fund balances. We're still, I would say, materially overfunded or projecting to be overfunded in our fund balances, both at 9/30/2022 and again at 9/30/2023. One of the big concerns we heard from residents last week is, if our target's 20%, why do we keep coming in substantially over that? Is the extra 3.7 million at the end of '22 earmarked for something?
Okay. Let me answer that. So you've asked a similar question about this before, and I kind of walked you through, and I'm happy to do it again. So this targeted balance is calculated based on, you know how if this weren't there's a lot of discussion and language that's at the bottom of the page.
Right.
It explains that it's calculated based on 2022 expenditures, et cetera, a portion of expenditures. It's not a pure, because we're subtracting off certain things that you don't have to spend if you are in dire straits. That's basically
Right.
what we're trying to do, is calculate that. So to compare this number to these balances, that would be a correct thing to do.
Right.
To compare this number to these balances would not be correct,
It's
because
not.
this is based on 2022.
Correct. So,
Okay.
but if I take that 18,276 into our expenditures for 21-22,
It's just a function of the way the schedule is presented. If you were to look at that schedule like last year, and this was walking down to a 21-22, then the number there would be applicable here. But the purpose of this schedule is to help you to understand where you would fall at the end of the year. So these ranges are relevant and calculated based on that, not that.
Okay, so let's just skip down to the bottom of the page then. Our policy is to have a target balance of $15.8 million. We're expecting with this budget that it will be $19 million. Are we saying that is $3.1 million of room to maybe consider in a tax rate decrease, which will reduce our revenue? Is that the money we're working with?
Yep.
That's what I'm trying to do.
That's why I presented this like this, to help you all to see what what is available. Now, as I consider myself to be your financial advisor, as your financial advisor, I would have you to bear in mind that all of this, and even still a little bit, the 21-22 is estimates. So we're using estimated numbers that we have done a lot of work and we believe to be accurate. But what happens if that doesn't hit the way we planned, and we cut it down to the nose? What happens if something unforeseen happens and those expenditures come in larger? So you can take that down to the nose if you wanted to. I'm telling you, as your financial advisor, it would not be wise. Okay.
We said 15 to 20%. We land at 24%.
Yeah, so some amount of that, somewhere in between here and here is where you can work with. That's why I'm showing it. Okay.
All right.
Do you have any other questions?
I'm good for now.
Good. Can I help anyone else?
I want to make sure that we know that that's a target
Right.
and not necessarily a goal. And I think it's really
What's the
important,
difference between target and goal?
because, as you just heard, the target and the goal is a range that allows us to be flexible in that regard.
Okay.
It-
Because they're estimated.
Because they're estimating all the
estimated, so
way,
you have
they're
to
all the
allow
way
for-
to September 30th, they're estimating what these numbers are going to be.
Right.
So we're not necessarily saying the minute we have $1 more, we need to give it back. We're not saying that. And
That's-
if you look at last year's budget, our target and our amount was more than the 15 to 20 last year. It was.
And I'll also add, and this is just a function of whether or not you care about those who regulate you, Whether or not you care about those who regulate you and provide, ratings for your debt funding and those sorts of things. They tend to like not to see that you're just scraping by. Meaning, this number here is barely bigger. They tend to like not to see that you're barely scraping by. Okay? Now, whether that means it's 3 million more or 1 million, that's for y'all to determine. But I'm just, as your financial advisor, trying to explain to you how it works.
Cheryl, let me ask you,
Okay.
in my world, when we're looking at, because I do a similar sheet like this when we set our budget, and when I look at our target, I always say 6% either direction above our fund balance, above what we consider. Do y'all work in a similar, or do most cities try to keep it real close?
Different, oh, you mean in terms of how much or little?
Because,
I mean,
because we are estimating, and there's no way when I set budgets
You wanna come
in
right-
January, I feel like a financial failure if I get to the end of the year and I have hit that exactly, because that means I didn't allow any room for a
problems,
disaster.
Right.
And so I always like to say, depending on our expenditures for the year, I always say I need 3% to 6% above and below.
Right.
Because that is because I am only estimating, and that allows for, like with this year.
Problems.
This year, I'll go pretty big because I don't know what's gonna happen with inflation. So as expenditures are, I know that my expenditures are going to be more than I've estimated, and so I'm gonna have an extra padding
Right.
in my funding this year.
Right.
Is that what you guys, I know with cities it's different because your transparency, of course, is different, and because your stakeholders are an entire city, whereas mine are, me and an owner. Does that work the same way for you guys?
Yeah, we're not necessarily looking for, is it 6% more? I mean, the target is the target, so your question is a fair question. The target is the target, whether it's some dollar amount or percentage more, something to allow for unforeseen problems, issues, whatever. Different cities do it differently. I'll tell you that there's one city that has so much fund balance,
Like Hondo?
yeah, that has so much fund balance, and that is their own philosophy in terms of the way that number is, housed, derived. That is a matter of comfort with their own businesses and citizens, et cetera. And some cities, if you pull this, it's like, just kind of scraping by. And so that's a function of what you all are comfortable with, right? I'm just trying to show you, if we were to factor all of those things in that we talked about and walk this thing down to the page, I'm just trying to show you what it would be.
Okay.
But the great thing about fund balance, it's 100% at council's discretion. And it can be seasonal. It can be, we feel very confident about the economy and we feel comfortable taking that down lower. It could be we're concerned about the economy and we want to save that a little bit more, but it's like I said, it's seasonal. So the great thing about it is that money trickles down. It's at your discretion as to how that's used.
So I don't want to go down a rabbit hole with the barn, but how long is it going to take us to build the barn? Because it looks like we're pretty much funding the entire project with general fund and hotel motel fund and a grant
Correct.
in this fiscal year.
So general fund, hotel, motel, and the grant. Yeah,
Right.
the grant.
That
takes
pays
up
for the
with
barn,
Correct.
minus a couple of $100,000.
Right.
Well, and our rules with the grant are, we have to.
We have to.
We have to
do
spend
that
it
within
this
2
year.
years.
Understood, we have 2 years, and that period started a few months ago, is that right?
Yeah, a few months
have
ago.
2 years?
2 years to spend the grant funding. Keep in mind, there's also gonna be FF&E if we build the barn, so we don't know where the bid's gonna come back as. We've had them all over from 3.7 to 4.5. You're gonna need food, furniture and fixtures and all that stuff on top of that, so I'd add a few $100,000. To answer your question as far as building is concerned, perfect world, 6 to 8 months. We're not in a perfect world, okay? And you add grant funding and parameters, and with that, I mean, you're probably looking closer to a year. Yeah, once we get the green light.
So less than the 2 years within the prescribed
There you
period.
go.
Yeah.
Yep.
And when did the barn grant clock start ticking?
I'd have to look that up, but it was several months ago. I can get an answer for you
Several,
real quick.
okay. I'd just like to know sort of where we are.
Sure.
in our 2-year period. And when we need that money or want that money, we have to prove that we're breaking ground, or we're certain.
reimbursement.
It's a reimbursement, yeah, so we'd have to move forward with the project once it's done.
Spend $1 million and then
Yep.
say, hey, we're ready for our reimbursement.
This may be relevant, let me tweak something with that. You don't have to spend the whole thing, you get reimbursed along the way. So it's not the full amount out of our pockets and waiting to be reimbursed. As you conduct as you go about the construction process and are expending money, there's a process with this federal agency where you submit for reimbursements along the way. When you said the $1.4 million, I was like, let me just make sure you understand, you don't have to lay the
Sure.
whole thing out.
Okay, and so how would we do that, like a monthly type thing, or we get to a certain amount? Is that just-
They've conducted some conversations with the team members who would do it. And so it's going to be several times throughout the year. It could be monthly, it could be done quarterly, but it'll be several times throughout the year.
Okay,
Is it based on benchmarks?
I'd have to get the exact information for you, yeah.
okay, but nonetheless, we're not going to have to spend $1.4 million.
Correct. When you said that
and then
big
wait
number,
for
I
a
was
check,
like,
and start drawing more money out of our general funds.
I'll find out the exact
Okay.
times and benchmarks for you.
I attended that training with the federal organization. That's why I'm loosely familiar with how it is done. And you are not looking to spend the entire $4 million and waiting on, their 2.6 back.
Right.
I'm sure of that. And I'm sure that the payments happen over a period of time, whether that's monthly or quarterly. I'd have to refer back to the discussion, but it's a regular basis where you're reimbursed for it.
So where I'm going with this is that we think it'll take a year to build, right? It may take longer. It may take shorter. I doubt it'll take shorter, just given logistics and labor issues and things going on, right? So we are straddling then the 23-24 fiscal year, and I would suggest then that may give us some room in our general fund to the tune of 1.2 million, and in the 23-24 budget, again, tap into hotel motel for us to pick up the remaining expenses or the back end of the
How would they do that, though?
project.
You want them to just stop mid-project and say, hey, we've hit our threshold, so now we halt and we send construction home because it only took us 6 months? I mean, I don't see how you set a budget for a project like that, because you're trying to straddle 2 years, and you don't know where in that
Right.
process that's gonna
We're guessing.
end. And so if we don't fund it, then what you're risking is that they're all working on that project, and we say, all right, we've hit the threshold for the budget this year, we're sending workers back home, and so then you've got to get that project started back in 23-24 in October, when that new budget.
That's not what I'm suggesting. What I'm saying is that if we need to take 1.2 out of general fund because we've got a bunch of miracle workers out there building a barn, then we take it out of general fund and we get closer to our 20% mark. But we're guessing at a timeline right now. We need a better timeline. And when we get these bids back, I would assume we're going to get some timelines and be able to better estimate when that barn's going to be done. It's not going to be done in 6 months.
Or we could plan for the project that we have been talking about, plan for that, and enable us in 23-24 to plan for something different. If you are basically saying if you're basically saying in lieu of putting this here, and some of this could be, some of this, instead of it all being right here on general fund, some of it could be down here, then what you also do is, because the funding is there, right? The math works for you to do what you want to do and handle what this other project. So basically, all you would be doing is deferring it for down here or
Right.
23, 24,
Right.
and hoping that the numbers work.
Right, because it may be more expensive. You're not starting at all. You wouldn't be starting, to Tracy's point, you wouldn't be starting this project at all until you acquired the funds sometime in '23. Then you'd be going out to bid, and if we're assuming that things are at 20%, increase in labor and construction, you're gonna have a bigger total. And so therefore, you're kicking the can down the road with a risk of.
It costing more.
All I'm suggesting is that we have some room there to adjust the timing of the project, because we know, I feel pretty confident the project is going to go into the next budget year. I'm not saying let's move the money, I'm just saying that might be somewhere we could consider if we need to.
Let me explain to you how this actually works. Now you gotta go into my world. So when a big capital project like this is done, a major vendor, a lead vendor is selected, okay? They'll come before you and council, Mike and his team is gonna vet them, bids, et cetera, to figure out which is the best one. They'll come before you, and they're not gonna come before you and say, oh, can I have 50% of it so I can do half of it and then do half of it later. They're gonna come to do the work that was bid out, and that is the whole project.
Right.
And then what that enables the team to do, if that is the council's prerogative to approve that contract, then what that enables the team to do is set that up within a long-term capital project type fund so that you can roll and take care of what you said you wanted us to take care of. Vendors that do projects like this are interested in having the project bid, not 60% of the project to come back and do 40% next time. I'm just explaining to you how it works. And so basically, all that will happen is we're allocating the funds to set that, to set that project working so that we can move on to other things so you can see your way clear to move on to other things that are pressing infrastructure or whatever other issue du jour the city may be facing. Okay?
So you're saying we have to have all of the money allocated into a CIP fund?
You don't
When we
have
take-
to, but I'm telling you, it's gonna impact the
It's
types of bids.
advantageous.
Yeah, it's gonna impact the types of bids you get. If you say you wanna do 60% now and then, have you double back around and we wanna get the rest, because we would want to award the contract for the lead thing. You follow?
I do.
Okay.
Joel, I have a question. So our hotel fund has done better than we thought, it's rebounded much quicker. And that is an eligible use of funds for, say, the barn. Is it possible to, as we go through the project, provided that continues on that positive trend, can we reimburse the general fund?
Yes,
from the
yeah, you
hotel?
can,
So that might
yeah.
be, that might get us
Yes,
to
you
what you're
can.
trying to
That's
get.
where you're trying to get.
Thank you, John, that's very helpful to
Yeah.
understand.
Yes,
I
you
think
can
we-
do that.
I think that may get us there. We've been real conservative on sales tax and hotel occupancy
Right.
tax because we saw when we were in a pandemic, how quickly those funds could be impacted. We feel great about the hotel occupancy tax fund right now. We had one of our, I don't know if Allison's here, I think we had the best month
April.
maybe in our history.
We have no explanation for it.
Well, your team booked a lot of
We'll take
that
credit for it.
business, but that was great news, and we're seeing really positive trends with the multi-sport complex. That's only gonna get better.
Right.
We've had, 2 hotels that were kind of ready to go before the pandemic, that maybe those defrost and we can kind of get in more rooms, more revenues in. So I think there's a way to get to where I think you're trying to go
Right.
through that hotel fund.
Right.
What
Okay.
this would look like, so the manifestation of the idea that John is talking about is everybody mentally fast forward a year from now. Somebody's going through the budget and explaining that to you. And you'll look at something that shows where we estimate those fund balances to be. You'll be able to see yep, that's bigger than, that, that's $1 million or $2 million bigger than the target. Let's shift something in the same way that these things happen, that budget can be built to shift some of those funds back to general fund. Okay?
Okay.
That's possible.
And isn't one reason that we got the upgrade on our credit rating to AAA, which is very unusual for most cities and also in Texas, that we had healthy reserves and healthy fund balances across the board, across the city?
Absolutely. That is why I started the conversation. That's why I started the whole budget conversation, what feels like 6 months ago. It probably was just last month, but that's why that conversation started, with an external person explaining to you how that is determined as best, they can convey that, and the key factors. And one of those is fund balance, management. It's a lot of different things that factor into that. Following your reserve policy, so that's why one of the points that I made last week when we were proposing some things that would change in terms of some of those policies, you don't want to put a new reserve range out here that you can't hit, because then they start going, oh, why can't you, et cetera, as you're being evaluated. So yes, that is very, very much a factor. That's a question I routinely answer when we are being evaluated by rating agencies. How our fund balance, how our reserve policy, did we have to, for regular operating purposes, do things to utilize that balance? It's okay, like if you have a project and you want to use the balance to do whatever it may be, right? It's okay if you have a project, that's what the funds are for, right? But if you are using fund balance just to make it for multiple years, you should be looking for a downgrade in your rating.
And just like we know in our personal finances, it's always good to have some reserves. Most financial experts recommend, 6 months to 12 months of
3 to 6.
expenses, et cetera, to be able to deal with the crisis, deal with an emergency. And,
Yeah, so any other questions I can answer? Because I want to make sure that we get the options answered before we conclude.
I have some questions. So if I'm understanding this correctly, the portion that is highlighted in yellow represents the additional revenues that we didn't expect to come in, that ended up coming in, and that's them being expensed, right?
The additional, it's utilizing, it's ways that we can utilize basically a more positive performance
Right.
in the 21-22 year in order to put some of those items in a longer-term capital project that would help, improve things around the city.
Okay. I'm still having a little bit of difficulty understanding probably the bigger item, city manager authorized adjustments. Can you go over that one more time and maybe provide a few examples of what those are?
Yeah, so there are a number of things that are adjusted during the course of the year once we understand a better picture of our overall revenue and expenditures. An example would be because we've had such positive performance in our sales and use tax, and the way that the revenues basically all came into general fund, but sales and use tax is the basis for a number of things that happen within our ED fund in terms of incentives, et cetera, that we provide. Basically, we would be reimbursing that fund for the type of expenditures, activities, or whatever that coincide with a larger sales and use tax. That's kind of an example. Basically, there's a number of different types of entries that are routinely made that allocate revenues or expenditures to places that are most closely associated with the generation of those revenues and expenditures.
Okay.
It's the accounting matching principle.
Yeah, normally that would have just happened, in previous budgets, that just happened, that wasn't something that was highlighted out. As the interim, I wasn't comfortable just making those maneuvers, so I wanted that to be as transparent as possible, but typically, those would have just been adjustments that were made at the end of the year as Sherelle mentioned, we have a number of incentives for sales tax. You know, as we recruited companies in, they got a sales tax rebate or a credit. And so that came out of the ED fund. Well, the ED fund gets drained down to like $300,000. And now once we get the sales tax in at the end of the year, it replenishes that fund back up to its typical balance. But I have not made those adjustments yet, but that typically would have just happened.
So prior to the excess funds that we ended up receiving, what was the plan, given that we didn't know that we were going to be having excess sales tax revenue?
Well, each one of the funds that would be receiving some of this allocation had their own planned expenditures, their own planned revenue. You know, for instance, the ED fund, their revenue is primarily a transfer from, you know, general fund. You know, it can come in other sources, but their revenue is primarily that. And so with the more positive performance of sales and use tax of the general fund, basically we're saying some of that is properly matched to be allocated to that fund. But the mechanism by which when each month as sales and use tax is captured, and captured sounds too Game of Thronesy, as each month as sales and use tax is collected, it's better.
There you go.
They're reflected in the revenues on the general fund. And so when we have the opportunity, with hindsight, to see where we believe that performance to be, we're trying to most closely apply the matching principle to match the revenues to the location where the primary use of the expenditures happen. Did I say that good, matching?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, it's just a transfer. So you have an expenditure fund, you have your general fund, which is your revenue fund, and so you're just reimbursing your
I understand that,
expense.
So where I'm going with this is, it seems like we were okay. Previously, before we knew this excess revenue was available, we had some plans to move forward with the budget that was presented to us. And so for me, I saw additional revenue, and I saw that as an additional opportunity to try and cut the tax rate a little bit. And I know we've talked about it, and so I want to move forward to some of the options that you've prepared, and I have some questions, particularly on option number, I think it was 3, there we go. Where do the dividends come from for that dividend payment?
It would come from the difference between here. Same thing. Instead of it being a tax rate reduction, it's the method in which the payment would happen. Instead of it being a tax rate reduction, it could be done in the form of a check to all property owners. Same place.
How does that affect the SB2 implications moving forward?
It provides it without impacting future years.
That's kind of the attractiveness to that, to be honest with you, because
Because it's highly unattractive to me and having to do all these
It's
checks.
the equivalent of a tax rate reduction
Reduction.
in the form of a one, instead of it coming off the bill, it's a one-time check mailed back based on what you paid. The difficulty is, as Sherelle mentions, there's 13,000 of those that you have to calculate and mail, and it gets confusing because properties may have sold in that interim period where you actually paid it, but you sold it to David, but we've got to find you. That's the hard part, but the good part is when we get into the SB2 environment next year, we haven't lowered our tax rate, so our floor is here rather than here. So that's the advantage. I know Mayor Dodd, I think, was one of the founding fathers of that dividend. I'm not sure what the logic was back in that particular period, but it seemed to apply in the situation that we're in.
So it enables you to take it out of here without impacting the future year. And I will say this, for me to put a dividend payment up there as an option, knowing extreme labor-intensive option in terms of doing that, I must really believe that to lower that rate is going to impact your future.
To say there was weeping and gnashing of teeth would be an understatement when we started talking about it, but it did future-proof the city.
So when we talk about future-proofing the city, if we lowered the tax, well, let me start here first. We can only raise the tax rate next year by 3.5% or less, or else we have to go to the voters for an approval for something more than 3.5%.
Yes and no. Yes, you are correctly explaining how SB2 works. Now I'm getting all complicated. We have an amount of an unused increment that expires over the course of another year or so more. So next year, the answer may be no, right? Depending on how much you wanted to increase that amount. Maybe the year after, the answer is yes. Okay, so I wanted to answer your question
But
completely.
yes, you could go,
There's a
you could say, based on these needs, this is all we can collect, and we're asking you to support a higher tax. You could do that.
Yes.
Sure.
Yeah, but a vote would be expensive. There's cost.
There's a cost to
Not to
putting.
mention that
Correct.
is.
And we may well be in a recession next
Right,
year. That's
right.
what most economists are
Right.
forecasting.
Forecasting. And so asking for would be problematic all the way around.
So
Let me ask you with that, though, with the 3.5%, with SB2, is it, I thought it was based on our general revenues, period. Our revenues couldn't go up by 3.5, more than 3.5%.
It's your property tax revenue.
Right.
Okay.
That's what I'm saying. Our
And-
property tax revenues can't increase. So if, like, let's say with our west side development, we have a whole bunch of new parcels, and new construction, and our values all go up. I mean, and they've done an increase, but it has us, budgetary wise, it has us exceeding that 3.5% revenue threshold. Does that mean that we automatically have to decrease the tax rate in order? And I think that's what we all need to understand, is it's not just a flat, we can't decrease the tax from 0.0589. We can't have more revenue.
That's right.
Above 3.5%.
That's right.
So if all of our properties.
Without a vote.
Right, without a vote. So, which could mean that next year, we're basing our budget on this, X amount, but all of this finish out has happened, all of these parcels have sold, our tax values are above that, then we are forced to
Lower the number.
decrease the number or take it to a general vote. So
Right.
that's two different things.
Sure.
Correct.
And it does apply to new construction then.
So, yeah, the new construction, which was really high for us as the west side was developing, and it's decreasing as it's reaching, more finished out.
Fulfillment.
Right. So, yes, there's, and I started my conversation, you missed I'll have to show it to you. I went Excel spreadsheet and everything.
I watched.
Okay.
I watched the whole thing. I was so happy when I saw you bring up your Excel sheet. I was so jealous.
So, what I showed you last week in terms of how it works is like a really simplified way
Yeah.
of how, just trying to help you to understand how SB2 works. There are, the calculation to do SB2 is probably 8 or 9 pages, and it's like it looks like a 1040 tax form, add lines to, subtract this, divide, it's a complicated calculation. It involves removing the impact of new construction on your current year. It involves removing the impact of debt service. It involves factoring in what your collection rates are and, past years, current years, and et cetera. So it's more than just new construction that impacts it, but it's a complicated calculation that I didn't want to, in trying to explain a simple point, I was trying to keep it, simple.
Yeah, okay.
So for option 3, we talked about there being a vendor potentially involved to assist with some of the work. How much does that vendor cost, or?
I don't know.
range? Okay.
I don't know. I would need to work through that detail, should you be interested in that option.
Okay. I think, personally, I think I'm happy with option 3. I think it makes sure that for, future years in terms of the forecasting that you've done, it ensures that we're not being bound by the negative implications that the other ones have related to SB 2. I think it's an equitable way of making sure that everybody gets an equitable refund, in this case, of their taxes, and I think it gives people the answer that we've heard people looking for, which is a tax rate reduction.
Cool.
So I'm in support of option 3.
Now the question is, are all the rest of you in support of option 3? And at what amount?
Correct, that's at
Okay,
what amount?
that's what we gotta have.
That's, we gotta hash that out.
But of course, not voting.
Right. I just don't wanna come back, I don't wanna see you again and present something that you were not, generally have consensus around so that we can, run all these numbers through the budget, have it right and working for the 20th.
Yeah, and there are plenty of other topics still on the table, obviously one being which option and what amount, as you just pointed out, but there were other things that we were talking about, whether it be in tonight's discussion, the barn, and making sure that we adjust how we're going to approach that. How are we going to deal with potentially the police and fire payments as well? We had talked a couple of percentage points there that were in play. We also talked about MetroCrest requests and how we might deal with that, et cetera. So there's still a lot to unpack here, folks, that we need to wrangle around and move forward.
Well, since Omar's gone, I'll go next. We can just go in line. Cheryl, I appreciate your hard work, and I thought that the budget you presented and the options were well thought out. We're very transparent and we're equitable. If it is the will of the council that we need to do something more, the only option I would be interested in looking at is option 3, because I think that's the only fiscally responsible option that doesn't put future council, including myself, including all of us at this table, because we will all be here hopefully next year, on the, in the hot seat. So the status quo is my preferred, but if we need for political purposes to say that we're doing more to decrease the tax burden, because as a resident, I feel that as well, then option 3 would be the only one that I'd be interested in looking at.
When you say political purposes, who are you referring to?
Oh, it's all of us. All of us who start talking about making decisions based on fiscally irresponsible decisions because we want to dog whistle and say that we reduce tax rates. That's political.
Whoa.
It's political.
No.
So
I'm doing what residents asked us to do. If you listened to the last meeting, you heard loud and clear.
Oh, I did, but that's not, there's 35,000,
That's not political
35,
purposes.
it is
Let's one
political.
at a
It's
time, please.
35,000 residents. We didn't hear from every single resident. And I will tell you, as far as that discussion that was had last Tuesday, there was also a ton of misinformation that had been fed to those people before they spoke. A ton of it.
Like what?
We don't have to discuss last
We
week.
don't, we don't.
We don't.
We're
have to-
discussing it already. If you're gonna make statements, I'm just asking for
we
specifics.
need to move forward and not, if you and I want to have a discussion.
I just don't appreciate being accused.
I'm not accusing you
You
of
just said,
anything.
you just
No,
said this is
all
for
right,
political
let's-
purposes. So I'm just making sure,
And don't talk over each other and be quiet.
so I'm just making sure that it's on the record that I don't appreciate being accused. I don't appreciate allegations being made. I don't appreciate condescending statements being made. This is not the first time, but it is the first time that I've addressed it in public. And I want to make sure that you understand that I don't appreciate those.
Understood.
Mr. Driscoll, since we're going around addressing options,
Yes, thank you. Thank you. I am in favor of status quo. I don't like the name of it, but that's where I am.
I didn't know
do
what else
not
to
like
call it.
option 3 because there's nothing there for renters. And that's one reason that I prefer the status quo, which has the benefit of paying everyone who pays a water bill here, regardless of whether they own property or not. And I'd also like to remind everyone at this table, because we have 2 newer members, and I believe I'm correct, in the last 4 years, I think council has approved 2 tax rate cuts on property values, haven't we?
That's true.
2 times in the last 4 years. I believe that's correct, isn't it?
I believe so, I'm checking.
Yeah. And the reason I favor status quo number 1 is because we simply can't predict the future. When we talk about budgets and finances, in personal finances, and when I worked in finance and advising companies and individuals, it's a positive to have excess revenues, to have excess reserve funds. And in the world we live in today, who in the hell can predict the future? 2 years ago, who knew we were going to have a pandemic and the whole world shut down? We couldn't even go to work. We couldn't even go to work. And you know, a lot of experts say we're going to have another variant of the virus coming this winter, fall or winter. And, you know, most economists, most professional economists the world around predict that we are sliding into, and Europe is even more in a recession than we are. And we've got inflation at 40-year highs. And I think the prudent thing to do is to have some reserves. Who knows what the economy is going to do? Who can predict it? Who knows if we're going to have another pandemic? And there are a lot of smart people that I follow in Washington and other places who believe that we could be going into a much bigger war in Europe. There is a war raging there, and people are dying. And there are people that expect Comrade Putin to use a nuclear weapon because he's backed into a corner. And no one can predict his behavior. But there are a lot of people that are saying we may be in a war. And be no mistake about it, we are in an economic war with Russia, as is most of the West right now. And I'm comfortable having reserves.
If that's what our outlook is, then we shouldn't be building a barn. My concern is that if we're concerned about an economic recession and war and all of these scary things that you talked about, then my suggestion would be is that we not build a barn at least until we have updated financials, because right now they're 3-4 years old. And there's a lot that's happened economically since we've looked at that, the business plan that was presented several years ago where
Okay, for the barn. Got
where
it.
everybody
Got it.
looked at it and said, yes, this is a great thing, let's do it, and all of a sudden COVID happened, and we said, you know, let's
But
put
is
the
the
brakes
$4
on.
million estimate, is that 3 or 4 years old, Mike?
No, that's current, and you can have a business plan in a week. Yeah.
Sorry?
We'll have an updated business plan for you.
Michael and his team have been working
The
on it.
business plan is the revenue associated with our $4 million expense, which is equally as important to consider in saying yea or nay to the barn, particularly in the face of what you just talked about, which
$2.4 million net expense.
net expense,
Okay.
right? We
For
got
the
a
city,
couple of years to
right.
use it, use the other 1.4, but you talk about thinking about how you manage your personal finances. I think we'd all agree that when we see doom and gloom in the future, we begin to cut the things that we don't need. And in my mind, the barn is one of those things that's not a need. A need is public safety, water, electricity. Those are needs, and if we need to think about the doom and gloom scenario that you're talking about, then I would suggest that we put the barn aside for a while, until we have better numbers. I personally support the barn. I think this will be a wonderful thing. But if we're in wars, not sure how much our barn's gonna get used so that we can recoup some of our investment. I mean, you created that thought process in my mind, because I'm not thinking that we're headed for a doom and gloom scenario. I'm hoping that things are gonna get better and better and better, just as
So
John
do I.
Land said.
But I also live in the real world. We don't
Okay,
know.
well, I understand, but.
Nobody thought Putin was going to invade the whole world. The
Understood.
smartest people in the world. He's bluffing.
So,
He's trying to intimidate.
the point of the matter is, we're trying to manage our city to the
Right.
best of our ability with a fiscally responsible approach. You're entitled to your position, but I think we also know that we have this pent-up demand, and it is a want and a need, if you will, for the barn to create a new experience in the historical park that would be far beyond what we currently offer. And we have the monies, we see that. We talked about a plan to replenish those funds back into the general fund from hotel motel in the prior year. I think that would be one of the huge footnotes that we would accommodate here as we go through this. And I think part of this is just simply communicating, what we need and wants, and how David Merritt might do it versus how Richard Jackson or anybody else would do it. We could debate, ad nauseum on how we do those things. But I think we have been challenged and tasked with the opportunity to look at a very good scenario where our numbers are above those target fund balances. And we can do things because there are extra funds there. Now, is it solely giving a tax break back? Tax break comes on property taxes, and we've been talking about the excess funds have been predominantly from sales tax. Now, I'm not oblivious to the fact that my property taxes have gone up and my assessment values have gone up based on DCAD. That's outside of our realm. It's simply a response to an economic situation to where people are coming in droves to Texas. And demand for housing, it's a supply and demand issue. There are more people coming here year after year from all parts of the world, not just California. And so this idea of we're behind, I read it in today's paper, and one of the gentlemen that spoke in a prior one, look at the morning news. We are in a woeful deficit in Dallas for the number of apartments, woefully, that they think they need 20,000 more on a yearly basis to satisfy the demand. And we know rent prices in some cases are higher than residential mortgage payments as well. So it's an upside down equation here. And we need to position ourselves, in my opinion, to the best position that we can related to dealing with whether it's the sales tax, Rule 3.334, SB2, unforeseen, calamities, if you will. We're in a good spot, and we can still be ahead and still give back in some way, shape, or form. The water credit is one way of getting it back. A lot of people, I've heard, it's a gimmick, it's a game. It was one way to calculate a equitable across all parties. If we get honest with ourselves and talk about fairness, and doesn't seem right, if it's only based on property values, we take about 64% of our folks and give them away so much more a difference in this amount going forward. I told you in conversation at the end of the last meeting, I think a blend is probably somewhere in the best scenario to where you're able to give, and maybe it's not $132, Sherelle, I'm gonna, maybe it's $100, but you could give that across all parties and still potentially give either a dividend, as we're talking about, which addresses this amount, or touch a little bit on a decrease. We're getting financial guidance that giving a tax property decrease is not in our best interest. I'm not a financial planner. You guys may have more. You're a financial planner for personal, but we're talking about municipalities, totally different and much more complex. So I think we have to look at those particular issues as well. And we've got homestead exemptions, we've got disability and over 65 exemptions that we have raised, and those latter two, not the first one, the homestead is still at 20%, which is still, as we talked last week, very robust in comparison to other communities across the blend of 19 or 20 different cities that we've seen. So we're in a good spot. Now, are we gonna argue over, that middle ground of 327 and above, which we only have a third of our community in that space right now? We know we're gonna have more onboarding of additional projects, and there's $500 million perhaps in the pipeline of more things coming on board. And so that's going to generate more revenue in the property tax, which is good. And so we'll be in a better place with property taxes. Yes, we'd all like some relief, but at the same time, we're still getting services. That, I want to make sure that we don't lose that equation. We're not doing this for free. We're giving services. We have Chief Latimer and Chief Hale providing services, Bentley, and doing all of his infrastructure. You're getting something in return. It's not like you're paying and not getting anything. And we don't live in an a la carte community as well. I want to pay for the park, or I don't want to pay for the park. We don't work in that environment. So I'm off my soapbox. I'm somewhere in between 3 and maybe 1.
So I haven't stated my position on this, and I agree with you. I like option 1. Option 1 with a tax rate reduction of 2.5 cents, and the water base rate credit. And the reason why I support that is because I don't believe a 2.5 cent tax rate reduction is going to handicap us for years to come under SB 2. I may be wrong, I may be dead right. The water bill credit, even though a third of that is going to go to renters and such.
Not a third.
Well, 64% of our homeowners, 64% of those in this group,
320.
no, 64% were homesteaded.
Let me clarify some things on that.
We've got a lot of numbers here. A lot of percentages.
It's like, we're in this play, and then the narrator comes in to clarify things when needed.
We
Okay.
dim the light so you.
Right, I need a soliloquy thing, okay. You asked me last week about how many of our residential parcels have the base, the regular homestead exemption. It is correct, that is about 64, I don't have a number right in front of me, but like 64% or whatever I told you last week. There are a number of other exemptions that require require you to be in the home, right? So there's an over 65, that you can be a senior that lives in your home, but if for whatever reason you have to move to another place, another facility, it allows that to remain in place. What I'm trying to explain to you is that I have a number of other things on the roll that have some portion of requiring folks to live in the home. I also explained to you last week that it's difficult to utilize the information that's provided through DCAD to just put your finger on it and say what percentage of this is renters and what percentage is not.
Sure.
Because there are, even within the homestead rules, it allows you to not live in your home for up to 2 years, and you can maintain that exemption. So even with the homestead exemption, some portion of the people may have, may be renting their home during that period, and it will be lawful, okay? So I'm telling you that I have a lot more categories than just the homestead that require you to live there. But you have to figure out how to factor that, or how to, put a, how you process that information. It would be fair to say that more than 2/3 of the people within our community, though, are owning and living in the home. It would be fair to say that, because just the homestead is 2/3, and I got other line items, okay?
So that's
All
good.
right.
That's good. We have more than 2/3 of that number.
I didn't have, you asked me that question, so I was like, how do I explain this? And I felt like I had given like 16 other complicated answers, and so I was.
So let's assume it's 75%, or you can say 80%, whatever, it's better than
No,
2/3.
It should be better than
Right,
2/3.
we'll get the benefit of a water credit that, in some way, shape, or form, well, they're paying taxes, right? We know renters are paying taxes through their rent, but they are not the property owners, and thus they're not physically paying the property tax. But by reducing the tax rate a couple of cents, I don't think is going to hurt us long-term under SB 2. And we favor,
What do you base that on? You just think?
yeah,
Okay. Okay.
because we're all just thinking.
Okay.
I mean, we're having wars and all kinds of stuff over here, and nuclear bombs. I'm gonna think we're in, well, so.
Richard, there's a war going on right now, and more people have died in Ukraine than we lost in the Vietnam
I'm not
War.
making fun of the war.
Well, it sounds like you're making fun of
No,
it.
I'm just stating that we've got all
Okay,
kinds of
all
different
right.
thoughts
Okay.
around the table.
All right. Okay.
Can I just clarify? I'm not telling you the information about SB 2 because I just think it. I'm telling you the information about SB 2 and its impact on the future because I study the numbers and I know how they work.
And it's
Okay?
an unpredictable
Okay.
variable in the
Okay.
future.
I'm
That's good too.
favoring a 2-cent tax rate decrease, and I think that blending that with the water credit favors homeowners more.
And that would be correct. It would. I mean, where I was going with that 327, when we saw that before, if you are stopping at $327,000 as the average home price with the homestead exemption, the numbers skew to 64%. Below that are not going to benefit as much as the 1/3 above that. I mean, so that's where, if we're hearing that people are having a tough time and we need to help them, if we only do a tax credit, we're not helping that large component of the community as we potentially could. And so that's where, we need to consider what that is. 132 was the target I mentioned a moment ago. If you did $100, we're looking at $1.147 million in that water fund that's been on the books since the beginning when we met back in August. I mean, that's about 1.25% of the tax. Now, where we got all wrapped around the axle was, that was equivalent to a 5-cent tax reduction. And on the average.
On the average.
All right, and let's emphasize on the average. The old adage is, if my head's in the oven and my feet are in the ice box, on average, I'm fairly comfortable. And so, I mean, we got really wrapped around, that's where this 5-cent came from. And it was just thrown out there as an illustrative purpose. And we recognize that there's not 5-cent worth to work in. We need to work on these other projects that need to be funded and need to be accommodated for, and then see what this number is that we have. And hopefully, as we've been at this an hour and 20 minutes now, we've got to figure out what that number is. And it's not just picking out, I want 2 cents, because we've got to figure out how do we get to that? That's $1.6 million is 2 cents.
Right.
And so what do we have left that allows us to be at a comfortable position within those target ranges? doing all of these other things that we want to do. You want to fund, as I said a moment ago, you want to give police and fire an additional cent, or, 1%. $183,000 twice is $366,000. Oh, we accommodated for that. And I think the answer is at one point we had, but I don't know where we are in the new calcs.
What you mean? What
Is
do
it
you
there?
mean?
That's in, isn't it?
It's in.
It's in, all right,
It's in-
very good.
It's in the estimated expenditures.
Okay, thank you.
May I offer an idea?
Go right ahead.
I heard you say you supported the dividend.
Yes.
I heard you say you're comfortable with the current plan, but if you could support the dividend. Michael, I think you're clear on your position. David, you said you're 1 or 3, and you are 1. Councilman Jackson, how would you feel on option 3 if it was, the water credit was also included with the dividend?
Well, the water credit would just simply reduce our dividend payment, right?
No. What if it was additive? Can you put up those 3 options?
Oh, yeah.
So on option 1, we had both the water credit and the tax rate reduction. So what if on option 3, you had a tax rate dividend and you also included the water credit? Could you support that?
How do we calculate the dividend? And is there generally the same proportion of benefit for business and residential, being that sort of businesses get 3 times what residents would get?
Yeah, it's gonna work like the tax rate thing, except
be
instead
75%.
of telling the county to reduce the thing, to reduce the amount, we would either, the finance team or a vendor would take that tax roll, and if you said it was 2 cents, if you said it was 3 cents, if you said it was 1 cent, we would calculate based on the entire roll, what that would be. And so that's why when I put
Can
this
we-
up here, I explained that this basically it can be either one of these options. The only thing I'm saying is that with the dividend is that you can reduce or keep the tax rate, the water credit. The only thing with the dividend is just the method of making that payment to businesses and residents.
Sherelle, can we work on that? Can we work from the end number? And
Yes,
go
that's what
backwards?
I want.
That's what I'm saying. If we say, okay, look, we're looking at the difference between the 19 and the 15 target balances, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're looking at that and we say, okay,
Spend 2 million, spend 1, whatever, and that equates to, we can go get the
can we
cents.
go backwards
Mhm.
in that
Mhm.
equation?
Yep.
I think the
I can
dividend
subtract
allays the
as well as I can
concerns of the
multiply.
uncertainty of the SB2 environment.
Yes.
And I think that way you can accomplish the equivalent of a tax rate decrease
Reduction.
in a single payment rather than you not having to pay as much. But it also kind of future-proofs us, so next year, you can do a dividend again. You can say, hey, we're in great shape, we can do this again, you can continue doing that. My concern is not next year, it's 2 or 3 years out, I think is when we're really gonna feel it, because the new construction is gonna stop. We're nearing build-out, and it's gonna be, infill development is very slow, and so all the fees that we get for, or the fees that we get for permitting and all that's gonna stop, because we're not gonna have these massive new construction projects, we're not gonna have all this new valuation coming on the tax rolls.
You
and
might be
it's-
fighting for sales tax revenue.
And we may be looking
And so,
at sales
I
tax.
think that helps future-proof us. It gives the same equivalent of, say, if you did a 2-cent rebate and the tax credit, I think that checks a lot of our boxes, and we can, this is something we can do next year too.
Wait, what?
Water rebate?
Yeah, if we did the equivalent, yeah, I'm sorry.
It comes under
I think
it's
that-
under $3 million.
I think that,
6 plus 1 point.
So
that,
essentially, you're saying in option 4, where you don't eliminate the water credit and you have the
right,
dividend payment.
3.5.
Yeah, 3.3.
You can throw me out, but could you please consider what it's gonna cost to have the dividends issued?
Yeah,
Our city cannot do that. And so what kind of money is it going to cost
Not a public hearing.
that's going to be
Ma'am.
wasted? I'm sorry, throw me out.
No, you understand the rules, just.
I do, I'm sorry.
We allowed that to happen, but we're not gonna do it again. Go ahead.
Yeah, but there's going to be a cost. There's a mailing cost, there's going to be a cost of checks, there's gonna have to, I think, we found a group that we believe could perform this. It's
We
gonna
gotta
be,
vet that out.
I mean, that's gonna be more than $10,000 probably, to have a firm come out
It'd
and
be a lot more.
do this.
Yeah.
So there's
But
gonna be a
if,
building
if
cost.
that is
in that.
something that you're interested in, we can do the work to figure out what that option is, in terms of making that be a dividend payment. We did it before, years ago,
Sure, I mean,
and you didn't even have me at that time, so.
When do you suspect that you may have an idea of what a rough estimate for the cost for option 3 is?
It would not be before the, before the adoption of this budget, so.
but from a
um,
reasonable perspective, are we talking $10,000? Or are we talking $100,000?
We're not talking $100,000.
And so I think these are,
Yeah,
$100,000 we can address.
And again-
In the available funds that we have.
and again, let's not lose sight of the fact that we are actually having a conversation about how many millions of dollars we subtract from here, and we're
Correct.
saying
Correct.
we are concerned about the cost that it would take to distribute millions of dollars, you know? So there's funding available to be able to do that.
So is that our next step, is we need to decide what of that 19, between the 19 and the 15, is the council comfortable with, so that we can start to move forward?
What I understand is you need a consensus, try to reach some sort of consensus on which of the, how to distribute the money and the amount of the money so that the staff can move forward.
Correct. That's correct. So Richard, you're at 2 cents, I heard, but I also heard 2.5 cents. And if we also talk about the water, where are you at on the water rebate? What we had, 1.147, or some other number?
Yeah, I've got the total cost for a 2-cent tax rate reduction equivalent or dividend, plus a water credit would be 2.75, right? Because we said every penny was 860,000? Okay.
So you're at
So-
1.6 million on the tax portion of it.
On the tax portion, we're 1.6, on the water credit, we're at 1.15.
Yeah, so keep the credit as we have it.
Well, we do a dividend payment of 2.75. That's going to tilt more favor to business, correct?
What?
You said 1.75?
Is it 2.5?
2.75.
No, so if you're saying that you want to do a dividend of 2 cents and you want to keep the water credit, then the water credit is already on here.
Right.
You know, so it's there. And so then so you don't need to, unless you're working to tweak that number, we
Gotcha.
got that sitting there.
Okay,
So what we would need to understand is,
another 1.6 or.
yeah, so 1.6 off of it. Got it.
Okay, so, given that would be the path, I would go 3 cents on the tax rate equivalent for option 3.
Wait a minute, we just keep moving the target.
Yeah.
Let me understand what his position is so that I can keep notes. 3.5 and the water credit. So like option 3.5 or 3.5 cents and the water credit?
3 cents under option 3 and the water credit.
Okay, I understand your position.
So that's
Thanks for that.
2.4, 2.5 of the 3.2 that we have between 15 and 19.
Yeah, I
So we're gonna
understand.
leave about $1 million overfunded in our general fund at the end of next year. We're gonna give back 3 cents in a water credit. One other question on water credit. We have some folks that are property owners that are not sub-metered. Are they getting water credit? Or is there a way to get them water credit if not?
How do the other property owners who are the recipients of the water now, but are not sub-metered, how do they share in their portion of the bill?
So you're talking about renters, like apartment renters?
I don't know, yeah, you pose the option, so my
Um,
question back would be, what's the method that those people share equitably in the water bill?
Yeah.
So then
that's a good question.
that would probably be the source for where I would recommend that those residents who are sub-metered start in terms of working with whoever it is that carves up their bill to allocate whatever equitable portion it is that goes to them. And I would also say that if the bill is being, carved up and shared among those property owners in this sub-meter capacity, the bill is gonna be less, and so basically as the bill is carved up, correct.
Right, they're just passing it through.
Jill, I think you looked up the number of water accounts we had
Yeah.
versus the water properties we had, and it was within 300 or 400?
Yeah, so we have somewhere in the ballpark of 8,816 residential parcels. I shouldn't say somewhere in the ballpark of, that's a specific number. And basically, 95% of that number is the number of water accounts that we have. What I'm trying to tell you is that the situation where, sub-metered, et cetera, we got about what was my number I gave you? 300 and maybe 40?
380 some.
380 accounts that are different between the number of residential parcels we have versus the number of residential water accounts. So the concern, and it's a real one for those individuals who are sub-metered or, are in different kinds of situations. But I want you to understand that it's not representative of the pervasive majority.
Right,
Okay.
right. Yeah, I'm just trying to think of a way to allow these folks that are individual property owners that are paying a water bill through a master bill of their community to benefit from the water credit. Because again, the whole idea of this is to return tax dollars to taxpayers. And those people are taxpayers.
So under the option, they would receive something on the dividend. They're receiving something on the dividend.
I'll be honest, I raised the question, I have the Oak Brook Homeowners Association, I have 150, residents that are on a single water meter. This is important to me.
Right.
And if it is, if there is a way that we could do that and figure out a method to address that, but this is, we're looking at 5%. And in my case, if that is the number, 300, and I think it's 387 is the difference, maybe half of them are in my neck of the woods. So those are important to figure out how we can make that work.
Right.
But that's where, if you could figure out that it's predicated on their property address, we know we have, as you said, 8,816, that is the accurate number.
Sometimes I think that
And
when
we
I'm
have
not having to keep track of numbers, I'm losing my mind.
8,430
I don't know how you do it.
water customers. So the difference is, 380.
That's why you take the layered approach is, if you
They
miss
get
them,
something,
yeah.
but you're not having to walk the extra mile to figure out how you get them that, if it's 132 or if it's 100 or what have you. At the moment, it's 132.
It's like something clause. Everybody's getting something.
Everybody's getting something. And you can't, one size does not fit all, and it's really difficult.
Agreed.
Yeah.
That's the challenge.
They have an odd configuration with their water.
So how do you feel about 3.5?
3.5 million?
No, the option 3.5.
Oh, I was like, where's that number?
Let's say 3A.
3A, 3B.
Oh, 3B.
I think I'm fine with that as well.
Trace? You support that?
I'll get on board.
Okay,
I can live with that.
okay.
It'd be nice to give everybody a tax cut, but, you know, we've done two, and I feel a lot more comfortable if we've gotten through the rest of this year and, you know, into next year, doing a tax cut. But again, for the reasons I said, you know, there's a lot of uncertainty in the world right now, and, yeah.
Sherelle, if you wouldn't mind maybe summarizing for those in the audience who are having difficulty following the conversation, where we're at in terms of what 3A represents.
So if I understand it correctly, what we're saying is that we're interested in the dividend, but we're interested in maintaining the water credit. So the water credit will be maintained at its existing amount of $1.1 million, which is at 132 for residential customers. And then what I didn't hear, I heard one suggestion for an amount of a dividend payment, either in dollar amount or tax, you know, penny reduction, but I didn't hear consensus on that, and I need that.
I think we talked about it somewhere around 2.5, 2.6. Is that what numbers you came up
Do you
with?
No,
prefer the
no,
number to
no,
be in
I,
millions or cents?
just tell me the cents, I'll get it.
Yeah.
Just tell me the cents, and I will get it.
2 cents.
So he said 3.
He says 2
right.
cents.
3.
That was your
You
number.
said 2
You
cent
went
at
out on a limb and
first.
threw it out there first.
I would say 3 because
I'm
we've
just
already
writing
got
it down.
1.15 built in, and the other 3 is going to be 2.4. That reduces our excess in the projected general fund balance down to roughly $800,000, $900,000. So
Okay.
we're leaving $1 million
Okay.
of extra fund balance at the end of the year.
So you said 2 cent, you said 2 cent at first, changed to 3 cent. You said
3.
3, you say, sorry, let's make a deal in this, I have to get an answer.
I'm gonna
You
say 2, I'm gonna
you
say
say
2%. I think that's where we started, I think that's a good,
You
Two is where
say-
we started.
yeah,
2,
I think 2.
2.
And I understand where you're going, but, and we'll go back one more point. The 1.2 for the barn coming out of the general fund is in there, and you're okay with that, correct?
It's fine.
I will tell you on the barn, I'm really bullish on the barn. That is not a
Yeah.
cost, it's an investment.
It
That
is
is
an
gonna
investment.
generate hotel tax.
It is.
And we don't have a lot of things in the city that do that, and I think that's a perfect fit for the historical park. I will stand by the business plan that Michael comes up with, and the plans our historical board has put together over decades, getting ready for this. And I know there's some uncertainty about the future, but I will, as an administration, we're gonna make that work.
I agree, John, I agree with you on that. The decision and all that analysis was done by a prior council.
No question.
I'd just like to see something a little bit more current. Doesn't have to be that full packet that was done in 2017, 2018, but I'd just like to see the numbers. I want to understand what those,
And the future operations of that are designed to come out of the hotel fund too, so that shouldn't touch the general fund. And it should, we have so few things that are gonna generate that level of hotel tech.
And having the barn should generate more hotel motel
Absolutely.
revenue, just like the multi-sports center
Right.
and the other things.
Sorry. So I think we're gonna summarize. So we've got
3A with 2 cent property tax and the current 1.15 or 147, the water credit.
Just 132.
Can I say this? Okay. You said, what was the potential dividend payment that we had consensus
2
on?
cents.
2 cents and then 3 cents. You have 3 people at 2 cents and 2 people at 3 cents so far.
split the difference at 2.5?
Yeah.
No, it's just 2%, because who's going to be comfortable if we do 3%, coming back in a year or two down the road and say, we need to do a tax increase because the economy is in the can, which we were, if you look at, you know, people, I understand everyone's property values are going up, but they can go 2 ways, just like the market did today. If you look at from 2008 to 2012, 13, 14, 15, depending on where you lived in the country, your property went down, your values went down. Your taxes went down on your property. And I'm not predicting doom and gloom, Richard, but we don't know. Who knew we were going to be in the deep freeze in Texas, be shut down for 8 or 10 days a year and a half ago? And
And we use some fund balance
We're not
and
talking about
things
lowering the
and
tax
having
rate,
that
we're just
financial
talking about
flexibility.
dividend.
I know, but to
But
do
it's-
the 3%, well, anyway.
We do 2.5, that's just an extra $430, $430,000 on top of the 2. So we're looking at roughly 2 million plus the 1.15 water credit, which is already built into our budget. Yeah, it's a dividend, not a tax cut, it's a dividend.
I understand, but
Okay.
I'm for having more reserves in our reserves, so I'd a lot rather see 2%.
How did the
Where
other- How did the other three feel about 2% or 2?
2 cents.
I think we started with 2. I think we need to quit with the back and
Came in
forth
with
and back
2.
and forth. So we were,
We're getting financial advice
Advice.
to tell us that we should, if we then get into next year, we already heard that we could do more things potentially with next year's numbers. And it's a projection, as we've heard.
We'd have flexibility. If
We have
you have
flexibility.
reserves, you have flexibility. If you don't have cash, you don't have the reserves, you don't have much flexibility.
Well, that sounds
You
like.
have less.
It sounds like a lot of flexibility for $430,000.
On a budget of $174 million.
Yeah, I say give $430,000 more back to the taxpayers. That's all I'm saying.
But it's not coming out of property tax. Let's go
No,
back to
it's going to
that.
come out of general fund.
It's coming out of
All of this is
general
property tax.
No, it's not.
No, it's
No, it's not. Let's stop right there.
No,
It's
it's not.
wrong.
Yeah.
It's wrong.
Where does the city's revenue come from?
It
Tax.
comes from sales
sales
tax.
tax.
it
Let's
comes
go.
from-
Let's start again.
Tax.
Property tax.
But I'm saying
sales
return
tax,
some of
franchise
that-
tax, service fees. So when you cannot
Understood.
say that it's all property tax.
Okay,
That's
understood,
all. Okay?
understood.
That's all.
I'm saying it's not going to hurt us to give $430,000 more at a 2.5 cent equivalent in the dividend back to residents as opposed to 2.
Are you looking at me as if that was a question? It sounded more
Well, I'm
like a
making
statement, but,
I'm making a
okay.
It's
statement.
very clear, yeah. I understand your point completely.
Yeah, it's just another $430,000. But it goes back to the taxpayers.
So trying to.
And we're
build-
still over our 20% target by the end of next year in our general fund balance.
You keep saying that as if the target is not heavily baked with estimated numbers that might not go right.
And the estimates are guesstimates, let's be honest.
I mean,
Aren't
we
they?
do our very best to target.
Understood.
Yeah, okay.
Understood.
How do the rest of y'all feel about?
Yeah.
So we've got a couple at 2 and a couple at 3.
I think my suggestion was to split the
Split the
difference and
difference.
make it 2.5.
Where does that land us at the number of the projected balance?
Is that 2 million out of the reserve?
It's $2,030,000. It's 3.179 minus 2,030,000. It leaves us 1,150,000 over the 19,039 fund balance projected for 9/30/23.
Didn't leave you with this one.
This one right here, right.
This.
Oh, this one? No. Oh, I'm sorry, yes. Yeah, over the 15, yeah, thank you, 15,859. Sorry, I
1
kept looking
million
back.
over 15 or 1 million over 19?
No, it's 1 million over 15.
Shall we go around again?
1 million over 15. Yeah, no, sorry, I was,
I just wanted to clarify.
Yes,
We've
thank
heard that there's 3 people not interested in moving off the 2 number. That side is very clear. There's 1 person who's willing to come down. We haven't heard from you. You don't have to talk. We're trying to see if we can get a consensus. We don't have to have a consensus. Do you want to address this issue or not?
I mean, I was very clear on 3, and I've said 3 again, so this is my 3rd time saying 3, maybe 3rd time's the charm. But,
No, I
3.
understand you. All right, so I think that everybody has said everything they're going to say on the issue, I believe.
I think so. I'm at 2%. 2.
Okay. All right, well, that's what it's gotta be.
Anything else that we need to discuss?
We would like clarity on the life safety, right now, we have that estimated at 2%.
What is 2%?
The additional pay for police and fire.
To 109?
No, so it doesn't, this question doesn't change the number.
Right.
It was providing clarity in the method of payment for the additional 2%.
Over the
of
7.
Public safety pay,
Above the
above the
7.
7.
I didn't know
So-
we had agreed on that.
It's
Yeah, we
the-
discussed it as a,
The last meeting we had, there was like 2 meetings ago, we kind of came up with $1 million that we were challenged with. These are things we'd like to support, and let's find a way to do that. And then, what does that mean? What do we give up in order to get that? Cheryl kind of went through how we arrived at that.
and Brian recommended that we give it as a one-time, the
Correct.
2% over the 107, the 2% would be given it as a bonus. And that way, again, it protects future budgets.
We just want to get some clarity on that, because there's been discussions both ways.
Yep.
We have the money in this budget for that purpose.
Right.
Yep.
We just want to make sure, and I think the way we currently have it is a 7% across the board increase and then a 2% bonus.
Correct.
We just want to make sure that is your understanding.
That's what I
Now,
understood.
is that
That's what I
bonus gonna be
understood,
paid 1 and 1?
I believe it's
or
1 and 1.
two,
Is it 1 and
or
1?
what?
It's really by the direction of council. Typically, what we would do is October 1st for the October 14th or 15th check, whatever day that falls on, that would be calculated and that'd be paid out. But because it's a bonus type thing, we could certainly separate that to have some retention capability as well.
Encourage retention, so where we could do a half and half, I think that's what, I think
Yes.
that's what we've
One and
done
one.
with sign-on bonuses and
That's
things
what we
like that in
typically
a
do.
private, is we do it as a half and half.
Yeah. And that is what we typically do. But I need to know because I'm going to be setting the structures and.
But we have less of a retention incentive paying any of it in a lump sum. There's more retention incentive putting it in the salary, because if somebody gets that 1% bonus in October, they leave in January, they've just left with a bit of a windfall, right? Otherwise, they'd have to stay 6 months in order to make up that full 1%. So in my mind, I would more support just a straight pay increase, and no splitting of the bonuses or doing that kind of thing.
What we discussed last time, Councilman, was that, and council was split on that.
Right.
I can execute whatever council wishes. My comment won't change today. Fiduciarily and being a good steward of taxpayer dollars, I would still suggest that that be a lump sum, because year over year, you're adding that to base. We're already at 5% above the market. The marketplace just does not dictate. I'm a free market guy. I'm about as right-wing as you can possibly get. And I would tell you, the marketplace does not necessitate that increase into base pay. Certainly, you can do that, and I will execute if that's the wishes of the council.
But the market study said increase it by 6.
6.2.
Yeah,
They said
6.2 and
6.2 and we
5.9.
did 7.
And we did 7.
6.2.
And now-
And that's only because, so let me, for clarity for those that are in the audience, that's only because we already target 5% above market.
Right.
So what that means is it's really only 1.2 out of the mix.
Understood.
So by giving them an additional 2 in base pay, we're significantly higher, which is okay. I'm pro-employee, pro-police, pro-fire. But I want you to have the good data to make the decision. Once you do it in the base pay, then it's year over year. If we do it in a lump sum, you can do that, and you can come back to the table next year and tell me to do it again.
Yeah.
I will bring this information to you every year like I do, because we measure that every single year. And there has only been a couple years in my 9 years here that we didn't do something for fire, but we've done it every year for PD, and that's just based on market drivers. Yes,
So
sir.
just talking about market and data, how many years have you been here? I'm sorry.
9 years. yes, sir.
Yeah. How long have we been at the 105? When did we move that?
We moved that my second year here, so we've been here, actually, my first year, at the end of my first year. So basically 8 years.
Okay, all right.
And we have revisited that, I want to say 4 years ago. Council again said, yes, we like that, we're not the top of the heap, we're not Plano. And typically Plano is what is the top, but we do very well, and I believe that citizens get the best bang for the buck, because I think our employees are fantastic and our police and fire are top notch.
Right. Oh, I agree completely, and we want to do the best for them, and, you know, all of my conversations with people at PD and fire department, they want to work here, and they're glad to work here, and a lot of moved here because of our culture and everything, but talking about the data, in your 9 years here, I'm sure you do exit interviews when people leave.
We do.
Can you kind of give us a broad brush stroke, like in fire and PD, when you have your exit interviews, what are some of the reasons that come up? Do people leave because of pay, or have they in the last 9 years? Because, I mean, we're all in this competitive market all across the country, trying to get fire and PD, and it's been hard, but I think it's tending to get a little bit better.
Yes. And we actually do this across fire, every department. Like I said in council the other day, my streets department is the one that has the most turnover. And they can literally walk down the street and get $5 more an hour. We know that. It is what it is. We can't really compete in some cases. For PD and fire, we've had a couple that have left over that 9-year period where they have gone to a Plano. That was early on. That has not been in the last several years, because we continue to look at it every year. Most of the time, people leave because of culture, if they are leaving, or quite frankly, and recently I've heard grumblings of this, not people leaving, but in recruitment, is if they see the political winds changing, because people don't want to come to an organization. You wouldn't want to go work for an organization that you feel like you weren't supported. So if you feel like you're supported, great relationships with your customers, which is our citizenry, who we support. We work for y'all, we work for these folks here. So as long as that's being fed, for lack of a better term, to our employees, and they keep respect, excellence, accountability, care, and trust, that's what you're going to see delivered. So a lot of times PD and fire specifically have left because they're changing careers. More so with PD because they got out of policing, especially in the last several years where people are anti-police.
Yeah, people are entrepreneurial and want to start other businesses.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So if I may, and you're the human resources expert, but in my experience in the corporate world, people come to companies, or in my case, banks, and leave them for a variety of reasons. Personal conflicts, don't like the new boss, the new manager, change in strategy, et cetera, family reasons. But in your experience, have we lost officers in fire and PD over money issues, or is it more someone's moving to be closer to kids or grandkids, or
very few have lost
lifestyle
for money.
changes? And
Very, very, very few have been lost for money, and I could provide that to y'all.
Okay, yeah.
At least in the exit interview now, whether they're being honest or not, I would expect they are.
we have to assume
It's a one-on-one audience and it doesn't go anywhere. But no, usually it's because I'm changing careers, I'm going to move with family, I'm getting completely out of public safety, so.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Does everybody do an exit interview? Are there people that waive that opportunity?
There's many people that waive that. We do not force them to do an exit interview.
Many people that do that, okay.
Yeah. And when I say many, remember, PD and fire makeup, and I'm sure I will have the exact numbers, but they make up probably 40% of our population, but 60% of our cost, roughly. The majority of people I'm losing are not PD and fire. Right? The majority of people are streets.
Right.
So, because they don't want to go work where poop goes. Right? Just being serious. People don't want to get down in a drainage ditch and, work in that stuff. So,
If I may follow up, I know it's difficult, and it has been super difficult recruiting police officers.
yes.
What are some of the things that you've heard that people haven't come to us in the past? Has it been over money? Has it been because we had 25-year retirement, not 20? Has it been some of these other factors?
Sure, great question. So we've had a little bit of information on the 25-year 20. We have one officer that's our liaison to HR that goes through all the recruiting functions with us, is the person that helps us through, because HR is the one that does all the testing and that kind of thing, but they kind of oversee that kind of information as well. And they specifically asked that, and out of all of the folks that we're recruiting, usually it's anywhere from 15 to 50 at a time. You know, we're looking at a group of people. It's been less than 3 people have asked about the 2025 year. Where that hurts us, though, is once they find out, because they may not ask, but we disclose, and then people may step back. So that has been some of that. More so, it's been the fact that you have folks that they look around the country and they don't know that they want to necessarily go into PD. We've had a lot. We've had 50% of our population that has gone through, begun the academy, and then maybe even gone out to be in the field, have decided, nope, this is not for me.
Right.
And so that's something we try to give a really good showing of what it's about. It's not Hawaii 5-0, right? You don't get to go kick in doors every day and look at bikinis. That's not the thing, right? But
Not Texas.
Yeah, it's Texas and it's community policing. But once they've been through it, we've lost 50% recently. Now, that's not been over the 9 years, but in the last couple of years, when we hire 10, we can guesstimate that 5 of those are coming out after we've invested money in them.
Right. And then earlier, you said something about people not coming or deciding not to come for political reasons, something?
Yes. That's
Could
just
you
been
elaborate a little bit on that?
Sure. That's been a little bit, y'all will find with me, I'm a very direct and very shy. I'm not shy.
Straight.
I'm very direct.
We appreciate that.
Thank you. And you're going to get from me the truth. I won't sugarcoat it. I've had recruiters reach out to me and say specifically that people have decided not to come to work because they see council meetings. And they've decided that's not what they want to be involved with. And that's PD, fire, city manager roles. So it's been several, not typically in the parks world, not typically in the streets world, but that is specifically PD, fire, and city manager.
The candidates have specifically mentioned that as a reason they didn't want to
Yes.
move to Farmers Branch.
Yes.
I think that's kind of useful feedback for all of us.
Certainly.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Are you comfortable where we are at? Are you comfortable, Sherelle, where we're at? Is everyone across the table or around the table comfortable with where we're at?
I would prefer the straight 9% salary increase.
Okay.
That's just my preference based on feedback that I've heard from,
My preference would be the 107 with the 2%.
Mine
As
as
a-
well.
I think for me, I put myself in their shoes, and I know that in the past, I've received one-time bonuses, and they're great. It's a temporary, short-term, good feeling that you get, and then the money's gone, and then it's like, okay, my salary has not changed, and so next year, I'm going to be missing that money.
Well, it was a bonus, so it shouldn't be
I'm
something
not
you're
finished
missing.
talking.
All right.
So I think for me, I'd prefer the 2% to be a straight salary increase.
Again, the 107 is more than you were getting last year. So your salary increased 7%. The 2% is an add-on to that. So it's debatable. I mean, we're adding it to the long term. We're again getting guidance that says that that's not the best approach. So I simply go back to the professionals that are providing that guidance. I understand it'd be great, but you're adding to the bottom line overall. Yes, it's, what do we say, $360,000. You're adding that. Oh, it's only $400,000. We just spent it.
But it's adding to a
Public
permanent
safety.
cost base going
That's
forward.
what I'm saying.
And public safety.
I'm not arguing where it goes. I'm just saying it's, we shouldn't be flippant with the amount of dollars that we're talking about. And I'm supportive of police and fire. I think we're giving them above and beyond. We've already stated that. And again, still agreeable to giving the dividend or the one-time payout. So I think we have to be prudent. And next year it comes up again. It could be 107, could be 108 next year based on what we get on the numbers, and let's see where they land.
So for you're in favor of 107 plus the bonus, not the 109?
Correct.
Okay, so I understand everybody's position then.
Anything else we need to discuss?
I think that's the direction we need. We also have a meeting called for Thursday. We just want to make sure, do we need to still have that? Or do you feel like we have satisfied?
I personally think that
Questions?
we've covered all the ground that staff needed and we needed to address. If there are other questions that council people have, now would be the time to raise those and let's iron them out.
I'm nodding about let's make sure that we're all either of one accord or understanding that, we agree to disagree on these points. In terms of a Thursday meeting, I know we had talked about that as an option, and we can do it, but remember, we gotta flow these changes through and get it all posted on Friday, so that is,
I'm not going to be available Thursday.
yeah, okay. So that's extremely problematic to do this right
Do
and
we
get
have
it posted
anything
by
else that
Friday.
needs to be ironed out?
Yep.
Go ahead, Richard.
Is the $230,000 renter assistance in this number?
230 renter assistance?
It's for
For
MetroCrest
MetroCrest,
services. It's not just renters assistance, it's MetroCrest services, and they do a ton for our city besides just
The
renters
letter
assistance.
says for renter assistance, there's a $330,000 expectation. They're gonna take $100,000 of what they have now, and they need $230 from us specifically for renter assistance in Farmers Branch. That's what the letter says. Is that not what your letter says?
Somebody answer his question.
That's what their letter said. I've got the letter
Thank
too.
you. So is that in
Yes,
this
it's in there.
budget?
It's in
Okay.
there. So when we ran all of the changes, including the 2% additional for police, including the rerouting of the 25 to 20 TMRS option and all of those, it's like a TV show. It was like from 2 episodes or 3 episodes ago, and us getting together. So we ran all of those changes, and they are reflective in that's why I showed it to you like this, to show you what you would have when it all came down.
Okay. We had a lot of residents speak last week that didn't feel like the city should be taking their tax dollars and making charitable contributions, that was an individual's discretion.
Okay, I heard them too.
Okay.
That has been something in the past that I feel like I'm remembering and channeling maybe Charles Cox as I stand here, because he eloquently explained how a number of different cities, larger cities, have functions that enable them to provide certain types of additional, like add-on services. And the reason that a city, a larger city, may want to have those types of additional, that kind of easing into the charitable function, is because it has the great potential to make your community overall the type of community that you want to see. We want to make sure that we are providing the type of services that would maybe not have people living in their cars, or maybe not have, crime as high, right? So these types of programs, basically it's like in lieu of having a department that functions in that capacity. What MetroCrest Services enables us to do as a community is have them to vet the individuals who are in need of these services, possibly keep them out of our crime statistics as much, possibly keep them from creating an environment that's not as beneficial for our community overall. And so that has been the thought process for why those things have been included in the budget in the past. And I know you are a member of the MetroCrest Board, Councilmember Roman, I believe you are as well. And each time that I see MetroCrest come to the council meetings, they can provide very specific statistics to show how these dollars from this community are helping to support people within this community. So, I mean, did y'all feel Charles coming out?
Understood, so
We'll have to send him that, link. He's in me a little bit.
even though they are a 501c3, they are providing services that the city's not providing, but
Right.
contribute to the community.
And
I
I'll give you
realize-
another example that is real in my area where I work. So we handle the water accounts. And we hear from a number of individuals, sometimes when they call, they're having trouble, they're having a hard time. And when we hear that, financial issues with making, a payment, or, I fell on hard times and I'm doing my best, et cetera. When we hear that, what we do is work with that individual to refer them to MetroCrest Services. Because we're aware that they provide help with that type of thing, but better than what we could do with our team, because we're not equipped to help you with job training, to help you with all of these things that put you on a better footing so that you don't have to make that call to the water utility line the next time, and you're better equipped to be able to do that. So that funding, I mean, the amount that they said in the letter is for something different, right?
Right.
But some of that funding helps with those things as well, to help, make sure that we don't have as many people in our community that are having issues with not just the water utility, but, other types of living functions. Okay?
So we are giving to MetroCrest Services, is it 450,000 out of ARPA for the building?
From federal dollars that are not Farmers Branch taxpayer dollars.
Right.
Correct.
So 450 to ARPA, 230 for the renter assistance, comes out of general fund. How much else is coming out of general fund toward MetroCrest Services?
$241,700.
And do we have a contract with MetroCrest to provide services?
Yes.
And we'll have a contract around the 230,000?
I'm looking at you, Mr. Williamson.
Yes, there would be a contract for any new money movement between the city and MetroCrest Services.
So giving them the $230,000 for renter assistance has to be used for renter assistance, and that's what the contract will say. It can't be that they may use it for anything else. It's going to be for this purpose.
Correct. They have a general services contract with us, and then for that one, that has broader scope of services, because they do have a lot of services they provide for the whole community. But in this instance, it would be written by the attorney specifically for this one. And then every year, they come back to you all to report on their performance to that contract, and that's when you'll get to hear Tracy talk about how that money's been used to fulfill the contract.
Right, okay. Voters, residents spoke about it ad nauseum this week. It was my duty to bring it up.
Fair, but they are providing a service that we don't. And it's been years and years of doing so.
I'd also like to say that when Tracy, I think one of his last presentations to us about what they spend the money for and what categories and everything, I don't recall the statistics, but they will certainly provide them. He talked about the numbers of people who life happens. They lose a job, the car breaks down, have a medical emergency, somebody dies, that they have had a big dramatic increase in families coming in needing rental assistance. And, I think probably most of us in this room are fortunate. We're maybe not in that category, but a lot of folks are. And In my world, I do property management. I've been dealing with some of this now, not necessarily in Farmers Branch, but a lot of folks that rent and work 1 and 2 jobs are having a hard time. And when things happen, a lot of them need some help with food and feeding the kids and their rental assistance, whether it's apartment or a single-family home. And we did hear from a lot of residents last week, and I've also heard from residents since then that very much support MetroCrest services and the fact that we want to up our funding for them. And I believe that our fellow sister cities, Carrollton and Addison and Coppell, I think they are doing that as well.
Yeah, we talked to Stephen on Saturday morning, and
They were meeting the need. Carrollton was meeting the need.
Yeah. they were asking.
And I can understand folks that look at the dollars, I get that, I'm a financial guy, but I think as Sherelle was alluding to, and I believe I've heard Chief Hale talk about this too, and we all know the burdens on our police officers. I don't know the numbers or the percentage, and it varies probably during the year with literally the weather seasons and also the economy and things like that, but they have to deal with mental illness, all kinds of situations, people being put out of their house, working in real estate. I know where sometimes there's been some violent situations when someone has been evicted and foreclosed. It's unfortunate, we don't want that, but having MetroCrest services, the way I look at it, it's a buffer for people that maybe have some short-term problems, just life problems, and it helps them with money, with groceries, with getting medical care, mental health, that maybe they don't wind up being people that the police department has to deal with. And God knows we have enough, on them as it is. So I think that MetroCrest Services provides us very good value, and it's been alluded to. It's been discussed in previous council sessions and previous councils before we all got on here, that they provide a lot of services that many cities have departments that provide some of those services. So.
Do we know what other cities were asked and who had mentioned interest or told them no or said yes? No, we've heard Carrollton.
It's Addison, Coppell, Carrollton, and Farmers Branch. And so the only ones I've specifically talked to was Carrollton. I believe when I talked to Tracy about it, Addison had already approved. So I don't know, and I can't imagine that Coppell wouldn't, because it's a good way for them to use their excess funds, so.
Because when I met with Tracy, he said somebody said yes, somebody said no, and then he was gonna ask us, and then somebody else he was gonna ask. I just don't remember who it was. So I didn't know how that all
I don't
shook
know,
out.
I know that Tracy said Addison said yes. I know that we talked to Stephen with Carrollton, and he said yes. Coppell, I don't know.
But we're on this city council, regardless of what the others do.
Yeah, but I think we make frequent comparisons to other cities, and so I just kind of wanted to see what the rest were doing. I know in past history, we've given money when no one else jumped on board, and so I just wanted to make sure that we kind of got the flavor of the tea when everyone else is drinking. So it's tough for me because I really like MetroCrest services, and I know that they've provided a great deal of benefit to the people that live in my district. On the same token, when I showed people the numbers of how much we gave last year versus how much we're giving this year, they were shocked. I don't know what the right answer is. My heart says, give. I'd feel a lot better if it was my own money that I would be giving, because then I'd be solely responsible for that financial impact. But I'm just thinking of the other residents who came to speak and who were at my town hall and said, I support MetroCrest services. One lady told me this and said, well, why don't you just use the money for the repair programs that we have? Wouldn't that be a better use? And, I don't know. Just sharing what other people have shared with me. It's a hard decision. I've not made up my mind just yet.
Well, I think
It'll be in the budget.
it's gonna be in the
It's in the
budget.
budget.
It's in-
So you need, I would hope that you make up your mind now.
Oh, so this discussion is for the purpose of,
When do you, well, maybe ask.
because if it's already in the budget, then,
It's in the
then it's a moot point for us to discuss it.
Not necessarily, but if you have a difference of opinion, I think now would be the time to vet that, because it's in the budget and we're moving forward. And I think we're under that auspices that this needs to be finalized by Friday, so this can be done.
Okay, so that's all, I was just sharing my concerns about what other people have shared with me. But from the way I see it is, the budget is not final. I mean, if it's a, if my decision ends up being yes, then great. If it's no and I'm 4-1, then, that's fine. But I just want to make sure that I at least voice the concerns that I brought up, and I just kind of wanted to see how the conversation went with all of you.
Hi. So you're correct. The budget is not final until it's voted upon. However, what'll happen is, it'll be next week, fast forward, we'll have done the work to run the things through, the 2 cent, the police amounts, all of these things that we're talking about. And what'll happen is, you will be making changes on the fly that will change a number of things that are disclosed and that have to be very specifically read, that will change this by this percentage, so what I'm trying to prevent on the night of the adoption is messing up a number or something, because we are making further changes to a document, okay? So yes, you're 100% right, the budget is not final until y'all vote. In all practicality, it would very much be helpful. It would present the budget and make sure that we are generally in agreement on the key points within there.
That's why we're here. Again.
So are you proposing to take it out?
Well, I'm just trying to see how everyone else feels about it, if they've heard similar concerns, if they have an interest in revisiting the amount, whether it's reducing it or eliminating it completely.
Councilman Roman, I texted Tracy just to get the answer for you. Carrollton is using CDBG and $650,000. Capella is using $125,000 in ARPA. Addison is holding while they back fund the pension fund. And so, just give you context for the other cities around us and how they're interacting in the same question.
Okay, thank you.
But what that would mean, basically,
Could you repeat that?
Yes, okay. So the
Can you
question
maybe
was,
explain it?
where's the funding coming from for the other cities that was requested by Metro Crest Services? Carrollton is providing $650,000 using CDBG. Capella is using $125,000 in ARPA. Addison is waiting at this moment while they back fund their pension.
so what that means then is that, and it would depend on if that's the will of the council overall, but Addison waiting and trying to figure things out as they backfill probably means that that pool of funding that would help Addison residents with rental assistance is gonna be smaller. They would receive less help and support. Doesn't mean that, because they specifically attribute stuff within our community, so. What other communities do in this area is maybe an interesting piece of information to know, but if we're saying that we don't want to fund that, and that's a choice that you can make. If you're saying that you don't want to fund that, it may mean that some people in our community that need that specific type of assistance, there'll be less funding available to help them.
And I'm sorry, Ben, CDBG.
Community Development Block Grant, it's an entitlement city when you're above 50,000. So if we would have been above 50,000 at the census, we would have access to those funds. We have a small piece of it that Public Works accesses, but for social service arena, 50,000 is the level.
So they're using non-taxpayer funds. Carrollton is using non-taxpayer funds. we're using taxpayer funds.
That is correct.
Because you don't have a vehicle to use, you don't have a CDBG fund. Yeah.
So based on the feedback of the residents, dozens of emails I've received, I got one email of a resident that said, I'm okay with it. I'll propose that we remove it from the budget, and we can go around the table tonight with, oh no, that's your job,
You want to move what now? I'm sorry.
$230,000 of general fund funding for rental assistance to Metro Crest services.
Certainly. Obviously, you can't vote on it, but if that's the consensus, then the staff would take action.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm
Yeah,
talking, what is the
exactly.
consensus? Get consensus.
That's why you brought it up tonight instead of having to come back on Thursday.
Exactly, exactly.
What are you proposing?
Removing it.
I'm proposing that we remove the $230,000 of general fund funding from the budget and not contribute that to the renter's assistance with Metro Crest. I'm a giver. I'm not going to state what my position is personally on it. I'm simply advocating for what I've heard overwhelmingly from voters, residents.
He was undecided, remove. Anybody else want to weigh in on this?
I'm supporting Metro Crest at this particular time. I think their ask is going back to the proposals that we've done in the past of addressing services. We are, and the ordinances are written that the provider is an independent nonprofit established under the laws of the state of Texas for providing these services, social services for the people living in our city and the surrounding cities. And whereas we, with the responsibility of promoting and preserving the health, comfort, safety, peace, and good government and welfare of its residents, we are going to provide funds to the provider in order to better enable the provider to meet its services to Farmers Branch residents. I think that speaks volumes, that it's a service that we need to continue to extend. We have more funds, we're giving back funds, it's a balance. Does everybody win here? Probably not, but we are trying to meet the needs of a lot of different people, not just the folks that live in Brookhaven that will probably want to boot me out in the next election, and that's their purview. But
Let's keep the comments down, please.
that is, we're trying to run the city, and if we give everything back, and if we feel like we're not paying for a service, that's the misguided balance that I'm seeing here, that we're expecting a high level of service for a low dollar. That's prudent to try to get to, but it's difficult to achieve. And I think we're in a position, as I said earlier in the conversation, that we're above and we have the funds to do it. And we still meet our targets and we still meet our service to all residents, not just those that came and spoke, or sent you an email, or sent me an email. We have to do all of them. There's 3,800 people that live in, now do they all vote? No. You can laugh. I mean, it is what it is. I mean, 10% voter turnout. I mean, you're riling the beast, that's for sure. But at the end of the day, we've been asked to be prudent and wise with the dollars. They're providing a service that if we had to do, we couldn't do it for that money. And that's my 2 cents.
This was my ask, so I completely support giving Tracy the 230. I think he has been a wonderful partner with our city, and I think we have to be careful about not talking out of both sides of our mouths and saying that we need to give people back relief, and then at the same time saying, but we're not going to give any relief. We're not going to, but not in this way. councils before us have always supported MetroCrest. And it's been a good partnership. And I don't think he would ask if he didn't think that the need was real. And when we're talking about addressing our homelessness situation that is ever increasing in our city, when we're talking about, people living in their cars and increased crime, all of those usually are tied hand in hand with financial stress. So, yeah, I totally get your point that we are, it's not the city's job to be charitable givers, but unfortunately, sometimes that's the best investment in our community. And I think that's, when we're talking about the importance of public safety, we can't just look at it just from a public policing or just fighting fires. The safety of our citizens comes in lots of different ways, and sometimes that's through Tracy's help at MetroCrest Services. And I've employed 2 people out of MetroCrest Services that got funding in order to go to their dental assisting programs through Tracy's help. And so I saw firsthand the reinvestment in our community as an employer, so I'm supportive.
Well, I would basically agree with some of the comments that have been made by Councilmember Williams and Merritt. I'm for leaving the 230 in the budget. As I said before, I have heard from folks who feel it is very important, even use the words vital, that we continue to fund MetroCrest services. We can't predict the future, and maybe a lot of those folks weren't here speaking up last week, but I do know there are people that are hurting now that have trouble meeting their expenses. We all talk about inflation and the prices of everything going up, groceries, this, that, the other, et cetera, medical care, et cetera. And I think MetroCrest Services performs admirable services for all of the 4 cities they serve. And whether our dollars come out of this fund or this fund or this fund, and we don't have access to the CDBG, maybe we will after the next census because our city's growing. I'm 100% for helping it. Again, he identified a need, the rising number of people coming in, asking and needing rental assistance. I personally would not really be proud in representing Farmers Branch if all of our other 3 cities, regardless from what pool or pocket of money, they fund MetroCrest services, and we'd be the 1 out of 4 that says, well, we're not going to support you in your time of need. I would not feel good about that. And, a while ago, Richard, you said, well, it's only $430,000 more if we go to 2.5% instead of 2% for property owners. I'm a property owner too. But, you want to do that for the property owners, but you don't want to add 230 for people in our community that are going to need help in the coming year. And anyway, I'm for including it.
I have the information I need on my sheet, so.
Sorry, I was gonna say one other thing I wanted to talk about that I didn't see in the little, the last presentation was the Chamber of Commerce. I know we talked about a specific amount, I think we talked about $50,000 and seeing if that was something that could be allocated to them. I know that their funding is being reduced, I know at least for the Farmers Branch Chamber, but I'm not sure about the MetroCrest Chamber. Richard, you may know more about that situation there, but I think as our city continues to grow and attract more businesses, I know particularly on the east and the west side of town where there's development coming, I think it's important to have an advocate and a good partnership with our chambers And I think supporting them is an investment into our businesses who, when you look at our city's valuation, make up about 74 and change percent. And so I just want to make sure that even if it's a small amount, that we're able to make a good faith effort to extend our hand and say, hey, we recognize the work that you're doing. We believe in this investment, as small as it might be. And, you know, here's some extra money to help you continue to do the great work and maybe enhance some of your programming that you already have. So, and that 50,000, I just was thinking it might be split in half, 25 for the MetroCrest and 25 for the other one.
Ben, the last time we visited about this topic, one of the takeaways was that we were going to either review their metrics of both chambers or have some conversations about those chambers kind of at the time that they were coming to present, you know, where they do their regular update reporting. Do you have any updated information on that?
Both chambers are set for contracts that'll be at $15,000 next year. They're performance-based contracts. Both chambers, as of this past year, have been close to meeting it's a performance-based, so they've been close to meeting their performance deliverables. Neither one has been 100% for either quarter. Both have gone through quite a few changes, especially MetroCrest recently with Aaron departing to Denton. But they're both have provided their information and they're meeting the expectations of the contract with the performance measures they agreed to. They're just not fully capturing all of those, the biggest one being adding new businesses to their membership roster. But they are both performing per the contract. They're just not necessarily getting to 100%. They're getting close. They're just not at 100%. But this next year, it was designed for both chambers to move in parity to 15,000. They have the exact same performance measures, deliverables, and expectations.
And in terms of the metrics, is the only one that they've fallen short of the new membership one?
So it's new membership, so it's net gain in membership too, and they have to be current on their dues at a certain level of membership. So the minimum membership level, which they have the same level of membership, has to be current on dues, so you can't gain 10 members and lose 30. So it has to be a net positive gain as well, and so we audit their accounting to make sure they're meeting those standards.
What are some of the other metrics that they've excelled on?
The biggest one would be going and meeting with the businesses in Farmers Branch. And then another one that's a little bit of a challenge is providing meaningful feedback to our economic development team, because the driver for businesses and our engine is our economic development team, because Allison and her team can bring you all groups and work with you all to make incentives and deals to not only retain businesses, which Allison has a retention person, but also to bring in new businesses. Part of the things y'all do is offer incentives to those businesses. And so providing that feedback to economic development so it's truthful and meaningful and beneficial to the city. Maybe there's something we didn't catch. But the biggest one is encouraging the chambers to actually go out in the community and meet, interact with the businesses, be part of the business community for us. Because Allison's team is very successful, it's also very small. And so leveraging our resources that aren't there, so a force multiplier being the chambers of commerce.
Okay, so I'm hearing net new memberships, I'm hearing business visits, and then I'm hearing leads to business development. Are those the only three metrics?
Yes.
Okay, so it looks like, and how short were they in terms of their net new memberships?
They weren't too far off. I don't have the numbers with me, but it shows they were making progress. And of course, they send out their updates and we can see that they're adding new members, they're celebrating new members. But also beyond their contracts, they also bill us for membership in the chambers, which isn't part of the contract. They also bill us for any special events that they conduct. So their contract level is one element. They're usually adding about $7,000 to $10,000 a year in revenue from the city based on the events that they host that you all as a council say provide value to you all and you want to either sponsor or attend.
What are y'all's thoughts?
As I understand it, what's in the budget is $15,000 for MetroCrest Chamber and for $15,000 for Farmers Branch Chamber.
Yes.
Correct? Okay.
Plus some amount.
Plus
Right,
whatever
right,
comes
right,
out of
right.
our,
Yeah.
and that comes out of
The
the
council.
council
Mhm.
fund. Okay, yeah.
Yeah. I'm comfortable with leaving it where it is. I know this was a lot of discussion was spent on this topic in the previous council with Councilman Lynn, Baumgardner, Blackson, and Norwood. And I don't remember exactly what all they did, but I'm comfortable with leaving it where it is. I know both of the chambers are growing, they're adding businesses, and as Ben alluded to, the MetroCrest Chamber has new director, and the leadership there are all new, but both of them are adding new people all the time, adding new events, so I don't see a reason we need to change it.
Sure,
this-
that $1
this
million,
budget year.
the $1 million that we added, wasn't there an amount of money for chambers?
No,
There was not?
remember, we added, I could go back and pull the slide up, but we added a number of things, but there was not consensus, and it doesn't sound like there is even now. There was not consensus that chamber item was to be added, and basically, we said we would discuss it in an upcoming meeting in terms of the two chambers' metrics, et cetera, and their additional funding opportunity, which we have.
I'm all for supporting our chambers, absolutely. We need to drive more business, new business, maybe get our 75% share of tax revenue from business up to 80 or 85. And that will allow us to do a lot more things, for our residents in the city. So I would support any additional amount of funding. However, they're both under the same contract. They're entering into their third year of their contract. We have performance measures that are established. And contractually, it wouldn't make sense to me to arbitrarily give them money. We'd need to attach performance measures to that. And what is that aside from or in collaboration with what they're under now? So in my opinion, just from a contractual perspective, we let them finish out their contractual obligations. We relook at their metrics. I think the MetroCrest has a much bigger piece of dirt to farm than Farmers Branch does, and so do the same metrics, are the same metrics fair, appropriate, the different new metrics, other metrics? I would suggest we just save that for another conversation as well.
Ben, don't they have one more year on those contracts?
One more year, and their
Roughly.
metrics only apply for Farmers Branch for the chamber, so it's direct. So the MetroCrest Chamber, I'm looking for the businesses they're adding in Farmers Branch, not the other cities.
Okay.
The benefit being is that they can leverage, when MetroCrest hosts an event, they're bringing a much larger business pool together. So it's the rising tide philosophy of bringing a bigger network together.
Right, right.
I'm comfortable leaving it where it's at, contractual agreement, as you stated. Opportunity to look at it when it re-ups.
I agree with that. That makes sense.
Any other topics we want to cover?
Yes, I have 3 more. I'm just kidding.
As long as I get my answer tonight, so I can go
We're
work
turning
on
off the air conditioning.
I do have one.
Okay.
I've thrown it around a little bit, and I've talked about it before, and that's code enforcement officer. And we did talk about, in the last discussion, Leo raised the need, and we have seen the needs of, and the expectations of code enforcement ratchet up. And I know he has one on this budget already baked into it, and I think getting a second, what I'll say is an additional single code enforcement officer is worthy of discussion here if we have excess funds, which we do, in order to take on an entry-level position. And I understand we're going to fund an automobile as well, which would be amortized over 7 years or whatever the amortization of an automobile.
It'll still be capital out the door to get it done.
Correct.
Okay.
Understood. But we've heard numerous folks, if we want to go back to, the community speaking, and we need more code enforcement eyes on the street, if you will. We're asking them to do department inspections, et cetera, I think at an entry. Sorry?
Fire, they're doing fire inspections.
Right.
They were at my office today.
So I think it's worth our discussion at this point to attempt to slip one more into the budget and still be above our target.
And that would be for a total of how many?
I believe it would be two. It would be one more coming on board in the current budget, if I understand correctly, and then one more in addition.
So that would make a total of how many?
6.
6.
And me, plus me.
Okay.
So 6.5.
Yeah, right. 7.5. Where do you live, Mr. J? I'm just kidding, I know where you live. I know where y'all live.
We have one in the budget. One new one.
Yeah, the conversation that we had during the budget retreat about needing funding for an officer, I think we figured that out. Yeah, so it was what we thought it was.
Yeah.
Okay. And what we're saying is that there's a ask for, or a proposal for an additional code officer.
I will tell you, if we're talking about the amount of communication I get from residents, all of the majority of the communication I receive from residents in my area is code enforcement, the majority.
Do you think it's going to go down if there's another officer?
Well, maybe.
I wouldn't get your hopes up.
That's true.
I think there's probably a need, so I'm on board with that. Concern I have just is doing this on the fly here in the last 10 days or whatever of budget time. It's kind of ad hoc, and I'm sure if we talk to Mr. Bentley and Parks and Rec and Public Works and Economic Development, I think, I think we're running a pretty lean city in terms of, employee, head count and everything. I mean, am I wrong? But,
No, sir.
yeah,
No,
so,
several years ago, pre-Brian, pre-me, there was we laid off 33% of our non-public safety workforce. We've expanded the work, you see the population growth. We really should be at 50 so we can get those grants. That's a whole nother argument.
Right.
So that we could have those. But we service all of you, and we do it very leanly. I actually, in a conversation with Councilman Roman, noted that we make fun of it here. We're not really directors, we're directors. So, because we do the work that we're direct as well. So it's very lean. And you would probably hear that probably anywhere, but the good thing for you all is our revenue generation, our cost savings, all those things reflect that. So we actually can put money where our mouth is.
well, just an idea, because this is kind of spur of the moment, but we've got the new, what is it, the FB, the app? Yeah, and we haven't really had a year of feedback or data on that, have we?
No, the last presentation I gave was in June, was 6 months.
Right, yeah, so, I mean, we're rolling that out, that's supposedly gonna give us greater transparency, efficiency all across the board in all departments, and we're adding one, so how about if we just kind of hold off until the next budget cycle? I mean, because again, I think if we queried every department head, they go, well, yeah, we could use an extra here, or, planning and economic development would love to hire one and share them 50-50. Just my thoughts.
Just a proposal.
What's the cost of the employee plus the car?
About 80 to 85,000 total, full benefits, full the car, all that.
Cars included in that?
So residents were quite vocal about code enforcement concerns, right? And in the vein of providing services to our residents in exchange for tax dollars, right? I would support another code enforcement officer.
I'm in support of it too.
Would you be on board, Tracy?
I lost track of
I
what.
don't worry. Yeah, yeah. I said yes. I started.
Okay. I think it's addressing
No,
the
just I'll need
stated-
some info
Okay.
quickly.
Yep.
Okay.
Would you be on board, Michael?
Well, I said what I would prefer.
Okay.
So we're adding one, so, and we've got the app, so why don't we kind of see,
Fair enough.
you know, how much more efficient, how much more we can cover and everything.
Would it be
Going forward.
true, the app is actually generating more activity? Do you see that coming?
Yes, I mean, when it gets easier to file a complaint, more come in. And it really is just the logistics of it, you know, sometimes before the app, people would just drive by and, you know, oh, I need to report that. And by the time they get home, they forget, right? Or why isn't anybody doing anything about that? Who has seen it, who hasn't? But with the app, it is easier to file complaints, so more of the, we knew this would happen. At my last city, we did the exact same thing we're doing here. And as soon as the app came on board, complaints went up because it was just easier to file them. And so that did happen. We expected that to happen, yeah.
The biggest thing with the app was to, unfortunately, council members had been quasi-code officers for a very long time, and the city manager. It was to create a workflow, to create accountability with the city without having to bring the council into every single code violation, to where you can actively go and look at the violations as they're progressing, seeing what your residents, your constituents are reporting, but at the same time, as Tracy joked, get back her code enforcement badge, because what would happen is you have a lot to talk about. This is a huge budget with a lot of elements going on, but you'd find a disproportionate amount of your time dedicated to code enforcement. So what it did is it streamlined the workflow, ensured transparency, but again, it is increasing the amount of topics. And we still talk consistently about code enforcement, but it has changed how we talk about code enforcement to where less of your time is consumed on code enforcement. The data is readily available, sitting out there for anyone to see.
Yeah. So the moral of the story is we're short one now. We've got one in the budget. We want to add one, and we expect that the app, for all its great efficiencies, is going to cause more work on our code enforcement, so we can still not run. I would advocate
Well, and we
for
opened up
addition.
the alleyways, and so that's an added,
We did what?
we've opened up the alleyways
Okay.
through those
We're working on it,
agreements. Yes, we will open up the alleyways, and so that's
I'm
gonna,
sorry.
no.
But we also have,
We're waiting on the
when
city.
I told you last time we met, where the extra person that I requested will let us handle the load in front of us now. So literally, we're at the point sometimes where an employee takes a week off, every one of us is struggling until they get back. We're barely handling what we have. So this first person I asked for was to get us out of that, so we can better handle what's before us now. Well, coming up, garage sales, that's a new thing. Home occupations, we haven't talked much about, but we need to address those because we do get complaints. The easement situation, I'm still working on that, but that'll come. Possibly more, I've heard about more parking issues on the street. Large vehicles might be discussed in the future, so things are coming. And so, I'll just say it again, we'll be saturated very quickly again. So, I was unaware that this conversation was coming up, I appreciate you bringing it up. But without an additional body, we will be right back to where I am now, which is we've got a lot of stuff, and one person takes vacation and the rest of us are drowning. So, yeah, if the winds are shifting, I was surprised when you, Ms. Williams, told me at the last meeting that you were hearing a lot about it. I just hadn't heard you say a comment like that before. And I thought, okay, I've heard it from some, but not from you. And so if that's how folks are feeling, more is on its way, and I need more if I'm gonna accommodate those people. So just FYI.
And so to be clear, I think there were some people in the audience who were shocked about the statement. We have not started to go into the alleys just yet for code enforcement.
No, no, not yet. We have to work that out with Encore, and I'm doing that. They're lawyers and our lawyers, so that'll be a blast. But we're working on it, but not yet. Okay.
Like, hey.
That's why Kevin has less of a sense of humor.
Just one thing for council. This came up several years ago. A few of you were on the dais at the time. You guys can really either mitigate or exacerbate issues with code enforcement, because once you tell us how, or tell the code enforcement team how to go out and act and execute code enforcement to what you all want, you can't keep changing back and forth. We literally were losing folks because they don't know from week to week what they're supposed to be doing. You know, go be hard on the problem, don't be hard on the problem. Mayor Dye asked a couple years ago, Brian, is that becoming a problem? I said, that's why we're losing folks. We were not losing folks because of money. We were not losing folks because of culture. We were losing folks because they did not know who they need to go do code enforcement for, and because it changed. So I would ask a request kindly and as respectfully as possible, please give clear direction, because they will do what you ask them to do.
I think we should probably talk about tree stumps.
All right. We'll go around the table. I think we've discussed that. Richard, do you have anything else you want to bring up? Good. Michael? Tracy? Homer?
No.
John, is there anything we need to cover from your
No, we
seat?
appreciate y'all staying in here and giving us, I think we have the direction that we need. We will have this posted Friday. It's voted on next Tuesday. We will not meet Thursday.
You'll
Is that
not
correct?
meet Thursday.
Very good.
You have everything you need. Right. Then we will close the study session at 7:50 and enjoy the rest of your evening.